Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Became a Hero Strategist? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku numbly watched the door shut behind All Might. Kaken had been right, he really couldn't be a hero. Izuku felt the tears prickling at the corners of his eyes and looked around. If he went home right now, Mom would hear him crying in his room and wonder what was wrong, and Izuku didn't really feel up to explaining himself right then. This rooftop, however, was completely deserted. Making his decision, he sat down and hugged his knees to his chest as he let himself break down. He should have known that would be All Might's answer. He had studied quirks for years, so he of all people should know that a quirkless teenager had no chance of beating villains with strong quirks. He couldn't even beat Kaken. He should have seen this coming, so why did it still hurt so much? After a few minutes of this, he became vaguely aware of the sounds of fireworks in the distance and almost stood up to look before changing his mind and curling up even tighter as he sobbed harder. The fireworks would probably look pretty and might even cheer him up a little bit, but Izuku wasn't really in the mood for pretty things. No matter how cool they looked, fireworks wouldn't be able to put his shattered dream back together. The explosions were a good background for his pity party though, Izuku thought with a wet chuckle. It was almost like the world itself was celebrating that he'd finally come to terms with reality. He couldn't really tell if he was sobbing or laughing at the mental image of Kaken and his teachers in party hats, gathering around a cake with All Might's true form on it as they set off confetti poppers. Congratulations! He was definitely laughing now. Kaken would totally have a disgruntled expression on his face at being forced into a party hat, but Auntie Mistuki would probably just hit him on the head if he tried to take it off. Mom would be the one to cut the cake, and she'd look proud and relieved as she gave him the first piece and told him to be sure to pick something safe for his next dream. Izuku took a deep breath and stood up, wiping the last of his tears from his cheeks. There was still a dull ache in his chest, and he still didn't know what he was supposed to do now, but it probably wasn't the best coping mechanism, but he felt like his imaginary pity party was almost like a funeral for his aspirations of being a hero. Wait, was this feeling grief? That would make sense, but it seemed weird to feel grief for something that wasn't a person. His dream was kind of like a pet, right? He'd cared for it for years and refused to let go, and now it was gone, so it was probably okay to be a little sad. The sun had set sometime during his breakdown, so Izuku hurried straight home, only pausing once to check his reflection in a shop window to make sure his eyes weren't too red. He ran up the stairs to his apartment and quickly took off his shoes before digging in his backpack for his hero analysis notebook. Between the sludge villain and the koi pond, he was lucky that it was legible at all. He should put it in the freezer to save it so he could transfer his notes into another book. Then he could carefully take out the pages that All Might had signed and frame them. "I'm home," he called out as he walked toward the kitchen. He should put the notebook in a plastic bag before putting it in the freezer so it didn't get anything gross on the food. His thoughts were interrupted by his mom running at him so fast that she slid across the kitchen floor and almost knocked him down with the force of her hug. "Oh, Izuku! I was so worried about you." Izuku looked at the clock. He wasn't that much later than he normally was. He knew for a fact he'd gotten home much later because he'd lost track of time watching hero fights. So why was Mom so worried today? She couldn't know what All Might had told him yet, could she? Mom was still talking, rambling in her worry. "I saw about Katsuki on the news and I know that you take that route home sometimes, and I couldn't see you and you weren't answering your phone and I was just imagining what would have happened if the villain had grabbed you instead. Because Katsuki was barely fighting him off with his explosions and..." Izuku went cold. "What? What happened to Kaken?" Mom froze. "Why, you didn't know?" Izuku shook his head frantically and stared at her with wide eyes. Mom pressed her lips together in worry, then led him into the living room and unmuted the TV. There was a young reporter on the screen, backlit against a few still-burning fires as backdraft, and a few other heroes lingered in the background. But the sludge villain seemed to be intent on suffocating his victim. Thankfully, the heroes on the scene were able to keep the others in the area safe until the arrival of All Might, who defeated the villain and saved the hostage, as expected of the #1 hero. The sludge villain has now been taken into custody by police, while the hostage and several bystanders were taken to the hospital for various injuries. They had to take him to the hospital? Izuku fretted. Is he going to be okay? Thankfully, Mom nodded quickly. Mistuki said he won't even have to stay the night. The only reason they took him at all was because he apparently passed out for a minute or two before All Might got to him, but he's going to be okay. Izuku sighed in relief. He wasn't sure what he'd do if Kaken had been hurt or died. It would have been his fault for distracting All Might and making him use up all his time, and Izuku wasn't sure if he'd be able to deal with that, especially since the description of the villain sounded like the one All Might had saved Izuku from, which meant that Izuku distracting him probably allowed the villain to escape. It was a good thing he'd already held the funeral for his dream, because there was no way he was capable of being a hero if he let villains escape like that. But Kaken was okay. All Might saved him. Oh no. Was All Might okay? Izuku quickly excused himself and ran to his computer to look up footage of the fight. All Might didn't look tired, but then again he didn't look like a skeleton either, so Izuku knew he was good at hiding things. He almost melted in relief when All Might jumped away without talking to a single reporter as soon as Kaken was safe. He was already past his limit when he talked to Izuku, and he'd probably had to go beyond that to save Kaken, but that didn't mean he had to force himself to stay and chat. Hopefully he was at home taking a well-deserved nap. Izuku spent the rest of the night studying the fight. The sludge villain was a lot less impressive when he wasn't drowning in it, but apparently the heroes on the scene before All Might got there didn't agree, because they seemed at a loss for what to do. Izuku pulled out a new notebook and started analyzing. While it made sense for Backdraft to fight the fires, it would have been better to prioritize the rescue and have him dilute the villain enough for him to let go of Kaken. It would have meant leaving the fires burning, but since there were more fires the longer Kaken was held hostage, it would have been better in the long run. Empty Lady could have helped with evacuation, especially if Backdraft was busy taking care of the villain. Her height prevented her from getting into the narrow street where the fight was, but it was wide enough that she could have reached her arm in and let people climb onto it from the upper windows. And if she could reach her arm in, it might even have been possible for her to grab Kaken from the villain without ever stepping into the street, depending on how far down the street they were. Kamui Woods and Death Arms were more difficult, but if Kamui had looped around to come at the villain from behind, he might have been able to grab Kaken without getting in range of his hands. Death Arms could easily have helped with evacuation. Eventually, Mom confiscated his notebook and forced him to go to bed, but Izuku's head still kept him awake for another hour going through all the possibilities of how that fight could have gone differently. Finally, his thoughts slowed down enough for him to slowly drift off to sleep with one last coherent thought. Is there a way to help heroes work smarter? Let's do something at school. Alright students, remember that your finalized high school application plans need to be turned into the guidance counselor by the end of the week. The teacher said boredly. So if you want to make any changes, they need to be done by then. The bell rang and Izuku hurried to put the rest of his books and get out of the room before Kaken could corner him. Things had been kinda weird since the sludge villain incident a few days ago, and it seemed like Kaken was constantly 2 seconds away from exploding, even more so than he usually was, at least. It probably had something to do with the fact that he had to be saved, and he was probably thinking that. Their classmates were looking down on him for being weak, so Izuku just thought it would be smarter to avoid him until things calmed down a little bit. Unfortunately, Kaken had other plans. Izuku had barely managed to get out the front gates of the school when he found himself being slammed into the wall. He coughed as he struggled to catch his breath again, clutching his backpack to his chest so Kaken couldn't steal it. He had just finished transferring all his hero analysis notes into a fresh notebook. He couldn't let it get destroyed again. You heard what Teach said. Kaken scowled as he held Izuku against the wall. It's your last chance to change your FING mind about going to UA, you DMN nerd. You'd better take it, because there's no chance a worthless nobody like you is ever gonna be a hero. I know, Izuku muttered. Kaken froze. What did you just say? Izuku took a deep breath. I said I know, Kaken. I can't even defend myself from villains. How could I ever hope to defend other people? You were right, I'm never going to be a hero. Izuku took advantage of the short moment Kaken stood there gaping like a fish to pull out of his grip and run down the street, blinking away his tears. It was one thing admitting the truth to himself, but it was another thing entirely to say it to Kaken like that. It made it more real, somehow, and even though the pain was a lot less than it had been when All Might first gave him a reality check, it still hurt. And now everyone would know. It wouldn't take long for Kaken to rant about it to his lackeys, and from there it would spread like wildfire, and soon enough, the entire school would know that Izuku Midoriya had finally given up on his dream of being a hero. It would be too late to change his mind. But then again, wasn't it too late already? It had been too late ever since he turned 4. He was running out of time to find his new dream. Their high school plans were due in just a few days, but Izuku didn't know what he was supposed to write. He'd always wanted to go to UA because it was the best heroic school in Japan, but now he knew that he couldn't be a hero. It put everything into question. Maybe he should go to a different high school, since he didn't need to go to a school with a hero course anymore, but he still thought it would be cool to go to UA. It was where All Might had gone. He could just go into general studies. Or maybe one of the other courses would be better. Izuku ran a hand through his curls, wincing as his fingers caught in the tangles, and sighed. He needed to do a little more research before he made a decision. He sat down at his computer as soon as he got home and pulled up UA's website, navigating to the application page. He'd never actually read through the information about all the different courses, since he'd been too fixated on the hero course, but better late than never, right? Thankfully, there was a page on UA's explaining each of the different courses and how to apply. Izuku started off by reading about general studies, obviously, since that was most likely where he'd end up. It seemed pretty standard, honestly. They would teach him the basic subjects, but Izuku didn't know how to feel about the fact that it didn't have any particular focus. General studies would look good on his resume, but that seemed to be all it would do for him. He didn't want to get bored. Izuku bit his lip and clicked on the business course. There seemed to be a lot of money management involved in that one, which didn't really appeal to him. The heroic analytics classes sounded slightly better, but they mostly approached things from a marketing standpoint, rather than focusing on quirks like Izuku did. He decided to put a pin in that one. If he didn't find anything better, business might be a decent option, but it wasn't going to be his first choice. He almost just closed his browser instead of reading the page on the support course. He wasn't an engineer. He didn't have any experience in mechanics or fixing things, and while he found the way support items interacted with quirks interesting, he wasn't really interested in making them. But he'd looked through all the other courses, so he may as well glance at support, if only to complete the set. At first, the support course looked exactly like what Izuku expected. There were pictures of students standing with their inventions and groups of kids with grease-covered cheeks smiling at the camera, a wide variety of power tools and other things he couldn't name in the background. Try as he might, Izuku just couldn't see himself there, but then he noticed the different tracks. The business course obviously had different areas of emphasis, like marketing or economics, but Izuku had just assumed that support was like heroics or general studies, where all the students were grouped together and had similar goals. But about halfway down the support course information page, there was an explanation of different tracks within the support course. The first was invention, which the website said was obviously the most popular option. It focused on being able to create and maintain support items, specifically for heroes. Izuku had just kinda assumed that was what the entire support course did. What else could there be? Support items for civilians? But UA was a hero school? He scrolled past the invention track down to the next option. Design. It focused entirely on the aesthetics of hero costumes, something that Izuku hadn't even thought about as being part of support. It was a decently popular emphasis, and the students worked frequently with the business school to make sure they were designing looks that could sell, and with the invention track to make sure any support items visually matched the rest of the hero's costume. Izuku didn't think he was really artistic enough to enjoy that, though. That brought him to the final track, which almost seemed like it had been added to the list. As an afterthought. Intelligence and analytics. Unlike the other two tracks, there weren't any pictures advertising that emphasis, and it didn't seem like it was chosen very often, but as he read the short paragraph, Izuku gradually became so excited he could hardly breathe. Students in the Intelligence and Analytics track of UA's support course focus on quirk analysis and helping heroes improve their quirk control and skill. Students are trained in how to obtain useful information to help heroes and detectives track down and defeat villains, as well as how to use quirk analysis to pinpoint villains' weaknesses. Interested students also have the option of taking courses in strategy if desired. Izuku couldn't help but think of the heroes that stood on the sidelines and waited for all might while Kaken was being attacked by the sludge villain. If he joined the support course, he could share his strategies with them. He could help the heroes strategize better and use their quirks more intelligently to take down villains and protect people. It was too dangerous for a quirkless kid like him to be on the front lines, but that didn't mean he couldn't work behind the scenes to make sure the heroes had all the tools and information they needed so that they knew what to do. He could help the heroes work smarter. It was perfect. Izuku glanced over at his collection of hero analysis for the future. All these years, he'd assumed that the future he was preparing for was his career as a hero, but maybe this whole time, he'd really been preparing for a career in hero support. His cheeks were starting to hurt from how widely he was smiling, and he was vaguely aware of the fact that he was mumbling as his brain spun with plans and possibilities. He would have to work hard for the next 10 months if he had any chance of passing the entrance exam, but rather than being intimidated by the challenge, Izuku just felt invigorated. He grabbed a brand new notebook from his desk and wrote support course preparation on the cover. Izuku Midoriya had found a new dream. And this time, it was attainable. The final 10 months before the entrance exam flew by almost too quickly. One of the first things Izuku had done after finding his new dream was research everything he could find about analytics and intelligence gathering. He couldn't find that much, which he supposed shouldn't be very surprising, considering that he hadn't even known it was a career option, but the things that he could find emphasized computer skills and making sure that his analysis was understandable to other people. Izuku had worked non-stop to make sure he was ready for the entrance exam today. It was difficult, since UA's website didn't say what exactly he'd be asked to do, but he wasn't about to let that stop him. He threw himself into support with a passion, spending hours researching everything that heroes needed to know going into a situation and thinking about what he could do from behind the scenes to make them more effective. His hero analysis notebooks had improved as well. He still labeled them for the future, but he was now trying to focus on suggestions for improvement and on increasing the speed of his analysis. Izuku had shifted the focus of the notebooks from just heroes to everything to do with quirks and even battle strategy. He filled an entire notebook just with analyses of villains he'd seen on the news, and another with random quirks that he found on the street. He'd also stopped taking them out at school so that his bullies wouldn't be tempted to destroy these ones like they had all the others. School had surprisingly gotten a lot better for Izuku over the past few months. His bullies hadn't stopped after the word spread that he wasn't trying for the hero course anymore, but now everyone was at a loss for how to actually hurt him. He hadn't told anyone at school about the support course, since the high school application plans simply listed the school, not the emphasis. The teachers assumed he'd switched his goal to general studies, and from what Izuku could gather, the other students thought he was going for the nearest high school with a high acceptance rate. As a result, no one could target his new dream and all their insults fell flat. Even Kaken had switched to mostly ignoring him, or just calling him useless, which was a huge improvement. One of the best things that had come from his new dream, though, was actually his relationship with his mother. He hadn't realized just how much his old dream had come between them, but now that it was no longer in the way, they'd grown so much closer. Her worry seemed less like she was trying to suffocate him, and more like it was just how she showed that she cared. When he'd sat her down to talk about his new dream, she had immediately started crying. Izuku had understandably started panicking, wondering what he had said wrong, but as soon as she had calmed down enough to be coherent, Mom had assured him that she was just so happy and proud of him. He hadn't been quite sure how to feel about the fact that her first reaction to him giving up on his lifelong dream was to be so happy that she cried, but there wasn't much he could do about it. Maybe if she had just believed in him earlier. Izuku shook his head as he finished getting ready to leave. It wouldn't do any good to worry about what-ifs right now. Mom was just trying to keep him safe, so it made perfect sense that she would be happy that he'd picked a safer option. She had been a little nervous about him still working in the heroics industry, But after he'd assured her that he wouldn't actually be fighting anyone, she'd calmed down and had actually been surprisingly supportive. He carefully placed his laptop in his bag and smiled. Mom had gotten it for him as a celebration gift after he'd explained what intelligence and analytics was, and it had actually been her idea to sign him up for computer programming lessons at their local community center. He'd taken to them like a duck to water, and it hadn't been long at all before he'd started learning to hack. Mom didn't necessarily like when he called it hacking, since she thought that sounded dangerous or like something a villain would do, but Izuku had pointed out that it would be a really useful way to gather information. He'd be protected behind a screen, and the only people he'd be hacking were villains, to make sure they couldn't hide anything from the heroes. She'd come around pretty quickly after that. The last thing he packed was the portfolio he'd created to demonstrate his quirk analysis. UA's website had said that in addition to the same written exam that all the other courses took, the support course exam consisted of a portfolio and a practical. Izuku had spent months debating what to put in his portfolio before Mom had suggested simply turning in one of his hero analysis notebooks. He didn't feel like those were quite good enough to turn into UA, though, so he decided to turn in a new analysis notebook that was actually properly formatted. He'd picked 5 heroes and 5 villains to highlight, since the website had said he'd be analyzing both as part of UA, and he'd had Mom read through all of them to make sure they didn't just sound like his normal muttering. When he'd first started asking her to read his analyses to make sure other people could understand them, she'd pointed out that he wrote almost completely in run-on sentences and sometimes dropped words completely because his brain was moving faster than his hands could. He'd focused since then on editing his analyses into a coherent whole and making them easy to understand. The heroes he would eventually be working with needed to be able to read though and find what they needed, after all, so there needed to be some sort of formatting, and he couldn't use a lot of technical jargon, not that he ever really had. He'd experimented quite a bit and had even looked up how professional analysts formatted their essays for inspiration. Overall, Izuku was actually extremely proud of how professional his portfolio looked once he was finished, and Mom hadn't had any trouble understanding it, so that was a huge plus. Mom scooped him into a hug almost as soon as he made it to the kitchen. "Oh, baby. Do you have everything? Do you have your laptop? Will you even need your laptop? It's best to just bring it, right, even if you don't need it? Or will that be weird? They won't see it as cheating, will they? Oh, if only." "Mom, take a deep breath." He pulled away from her and smiled. "I'll be fine. I already checked the website, and support course applicants are allowed to bring any technology they think they'll need. I don't know if I'll need my laptop, but I want to be able to demonstrate my hacking if they ask me to." Mom sighed in relief. "Oh, that's good. I'm just so worried. I know you'll be fine and safe, but a mother worries, you know?" Izuku laughed. "Don't worry, the support course exam isn't like the hero course one, so I'm not going to get hurt. Just be glad you're not anti-Mitsuki today. No matter what the hero course practical is, there's bound to be some aspect of combat included." Mom wrung her hands nervously. "Oh, I don't think I'd be able to handle it. I know Katsuki can handle himself in a fight, but I'm just so glad you're not trying for the hero course. I'm not sure I'd even be able to let you leave the house without having a heart attack." Izuku smiled sadly. His grief had long since faded to a dull ache, and he hardly even noticed it anymore most days, but his nervousness about the entrance exam was bringing everything to the surface again. What if he'd made the wrong choice? What if he was meant to be a hero? What if he'd never really be satisfied with the support course? What if Kaken was right and he really was useless and he failed the entrance exam and ended up living under a bridge and— "Stop that, Izuku." Mom hit him gently on the arm and smiled to pull him from his spiral. "I'm the one who's supposed to be worrying, so just leave that to me, and you focus on doing your best. Okay, baby?" Izuku smiled and nodded in determination. "Thanks, Mom. I should get going. Wish me luck." "Good luck." Mom started sniffling as he put on his shoes, then started full-on crying as he waved to her when he got down to the street. Izuku gripped the straps of his backpack and took a deep breath as he headed toward the train station. He could do this. Izuku actually ended up getting to UA a few minutes early enough that he didn't even see Kaken, who should be taking the hero course exam today, on his way in. He looked up at the building, not even bothering to conceal his awe considering that he was far from the only applicant gaping at the fact that they were actually at UA. After a long moment, he shook himself and hurried into the building, taking everything in as he followed the signs to the support course exam orientation. He ended up in a large room lined with desks that were almost completely empty except for a few other early arrivals like himself. Izuku swallowed nervously as they all looked up at his arrival, his anxiety already getting the better of him as he ran to one of the seats in the back corner. He really wasn't ready to meet his future tormentors quite yet. After a few minutes of sitting in the oppressively silent room, Izuku decided that he needed to find something to distract himself. The longer he just sat there, the more he worried that he was somehow making a terrible mistake, or that he would fail the exam, or that the proctors would come up to him and tell him that UA had actually decided to not accept quirkless applicants this year. He could always analyze his fellow examinees and see if he could guess their quirks, but he knew that as soon as he started analyzing, he would also start mumbling, which would sound even louder in the quiet room, and then any hope he had of fading into the background would go out the window. Izuku thought for a moment before getting out his laptop. From what he'd read, UA had impressive cybersecurity, so it wouldn't hurt to take a look at their firewalls, right? He looked at the clock. He still had another 20 minutes until the exam started, and if he didn't do anything, he was going to go insane, so this would be a good way to keep himself busy and satisfy his curiosity at the same time. The rumors really hadn't exaggerated UA's security. Anywhere that Izuku would normally look for holes or backdoors were patched up and defended, and he grinned as he had to get more and more creative the more he poked around. Most villains would probably just take one look at the programs and decide to go hack somewhere less secure. Maybe if he were to... "What are you doing?" Izuku yelped and slammed his laptop shut, leaning back as far as he could to get away from the girl who was suddenly way too close to his face. He glanced around the room to find that most of the seats were filled. How long had he been trying to get past UA's firewalls? And more importantly, how long had this girl been there and how hadn't he noticed when she got in his personal space? Also, she was a girl. He swallowed nervously, but the girl didn't seem to be backing off anytime soon. "Nothing?" The girl grinned savagely, her pupils narrowing slightly, something that was made more obvious by the crosshairs in them. "If it was nothing, you wouldn't have been doing it." Were the crosshairs a result of her quirk? If so, then what was it? It was obviously something to do with her vision, and she seemed to be able to change her pupil size at will, so maybe it was like a telescope? That would be really cool. What were the limitations and oh, she was still staring at him. "Do you have a telescope quirk?" Izuku blurted out the question before his self-control caught up to his curiosity, then promptly turned bright red and started freaking out. Of course, the first time a girl ever willingly talks to him, and he has to make a fool of himself by asking about her quirk like some kind of creepy idiot. The girl didn't seem put off by it though. In fact, her grin just got bigger. "I'll tell you about my quirk if you tell me what you were doing on your computer." Izuku thought for a moment. He really wanted to know more about her quirk, but would she think he was weird? What was he thinking? She already thought he was weird. And he didn't know why. Maybe it was because she had gotten so close to him despite never meeting him before, but she didn't really seem like the type to stop talking to people just because they were weird. Or maybe that was wishful thinking. He smiled sheepishly. "I was trying to get past UA's firewalls?" The girl blinked at him for a moment, then laughed loudly. "That's awesome. Hacking UA before the exam even starts. What a way to make a first impression." Izuku's eyes widened and his stomach dropped. "Oh no. What was I thinking? I just wanted something to do and I've probably ruined my chances. They're gonna think I'm some kind of villain and..." He was startled from his mumbling by the girl flicking him on the forehead. "Did you have any luck?" He tilted his head. "What? Did you have any luck hacking UA?" No." Izuku didn't know why she didn't seem freaked out at all. In fact, she was acting like him hacking UA was a good thing. "Too bad." The girl shrugged. "That probably would have been a great way to get your foot in the door." Izuku thought about that for a moment, but it made his brain spin, so he just shook his head. "Well, I told you what I was doing. What about you? What's your quirk?" "Zoom." The girl was grinning again, and Izuku would probably have been intimidated if her energy wasn't so contagious. You weren't that far off with your telescope idea. I can see things as far away as 5 kilometers, but I mostly use it to zoom in on tiny things while I make my babies. Izuku's face went red again and he sputtered, "Bee babies?" She nodded. "Yep. I make all sorts of cool babies for heroes to use. My favorite baby is the jetpack I designed." She dug in her bag for a moment before slamming a grease-smeared folder in front of him. Izuku hesitated for a moment, but she looked like she was expecting him to do something, so he opened the folder and looked at the detailed blueprints inside. "These are really cool. Is this your portfolio?" She nodded. "Where's yours?" Izuku put his laptop back in his bag and handed her his own portfolio before going back to looking through her blueprints. A lot of it was technical jargon that he didn't understand, but after a minute, he thought he had a good idea of how the jetpack was supposed to work. "Is this based on Airjet's backpack?" "It's a super cool flying baby." The girl looked to be about halfway through his portfolio. "And these are really cool notes, Hacker-kun, but weren't you supposed to bring blueprints for your babies?" Izuku rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, actually, that's only for the invention track. I'm applying for intelligence and analytics, so, yeah." The girl looked back and forth between Izuku and his portfolio, then grinned. "That means that we'll have to work together so I can make super awesome babies based off your notes." She stuck her hand out for him to shake. "I'm Mei Hatsumi, future CEO of Hatsum Industries. What's your name, Hacker-kun?" Izuku grinned and took her hand. "Izuku Midoriya. Pleasure to meet you, Hatsum." "Oh, just call me Mei, Izuku-kun," Hatsum said dismissively, ignoring the way Izuku's face turned red again at the nickname. "We'll be working together a lot once school starts, so there's no point in pretending to be formal, don't you think?" Izuku wasn't really sure, but he wasn't about to say otherwise and risk ruining whatever this was. "Sure thing, I'm in." Mei nodded and handed his portfolio back, seemingly satisfied with the nickname, and Izuku breathed a sigh of relief as he returned her portfolio. Wait, were they friends now? The only person he ever had a nickname for before was Kaken, and they'd been friends once, so did that mean that Mei was his friend? Or were they just future business partners? What were people supposed to do with their friends? Izuku suddenly felt more nervous about his new friendship with Mei than he did about the exam, which he supposed was a good thing, since distracting himself from his exam anxiety was what he'd set out to do in the first place. The background chatter in the room died down and Izuku and Mei looked toward the front of the room to see Power Loader standing on the stage holding a mic. "Oh my goodness, it's the support hero Power Loader." Izuku couldn't help muttering, but Mei actually didn't seem to mind, something he'd have to unpack later. He's one of only a handful of heroes in Japan that has both a hero license and a support license, which means he can make his own support items, but he normally focuses on making them for. "Welcome, everyone, to the entrance exam." Power Loader cut off Izuku's muttering and Izuku slammed his mouth shut so he wouldn't start muttering again as the hero continued. "I'm Power Loader, the head of the support course here at UA, which should be the department you applied to. If you didn't apply to the support course, you're in the wrong place, so just leave and there's staff members at the front office who can help you find where you're supposed to be." There was an awkward shuffling for a moment as everyone looked around, but no one got up to leave, so Izuku assumed they were all in the right place. "Alright, first off is going to be the written exam, which will be taken here. Staff members will be handing out the exam as I explain a few things, so just ignore them and don't break the seal on your exam until I say you can begin. The exam is identical for all 4 courses at UA, but yours has an additional section with questions on support specifically. You'll have 3 hours. Next, you'll take the practical exam, which will be divided based on your emphasis. You'll have 4 hours to create a functional support item for the invention track, or a finished costume prototype for the design track, based on the prompts given. You'll turn in your portfolio when you start your practical exam." And now Izuku's anxiety was back. What was his practical exam going to be? He'd gathered that there wouldn't be many other applicants for the intelligence and analytics track, but Power Loader should have said something about it, right? Had he filled out his application incorrectly? He'd thought he checked it 5 times, but what if something went wrong? Or maybe they'd wanted him to use his intelligence gathering skills to figure out the exam before he'd arrived. A vacuum-wrapped packet was placed in front of him and Izuku forced himself to take a deep breath. It was too late to do anything about it now, and he couldn't afford to be worried about his practical exam when he hadn't even started the written one yet. It'd be fine. He could do this. All right, does everyone have your tests? Powerloader asked. Begin. Izuku didn't think that tests were normally supposed to be fun, and while his test anxiety definitely wasn't, he found himself forgetting to be nervous the more questions he answered. Even though the questions for the general section weren't extremely interesting, since they only covered the standard subjects he'd learned in middle school, they were challenging enough to make up for it. Izuku was glad that he'd studied in preparation for the test, because that meant that instead of being intimidating, the more difficult questions were actually invigorating. And then came the support section. Izuku assumed that part of its purpose was to gauge each student's potential for the other tracks, because the questions were pulled from all three. Izuku felt like he did decently well on the design questions, even if that wasn't exactly his passion, but the only questions about invention that he could even make sense of were the ones that dealt with computer hardware. Maybe he should have studied mechanics a little more? Oh well, it was too late for that now. To Izuku's surprise, there were only 2 questions about analysis and both of them were essays, so he could only hope that would be enough to show his skills and set him apart from the other applicants. He didn't want to have to think about what he'd do if his new dream got crushed like his last one had been. For the first analysis question, he was given a quirk registration form and told to theorize about the strengths and weaknesses of the quirk, as well as give suggestions about how to use it. To his surprise, he actually recognized the quirk. It belonged to a retired hero named Glimmer who could manipulate light energy around her body in the form of sparkles. At first, it didn't seem like a very powerful quirk, but Izuku knew better. The sparkles that Glimmer controlled didn't just look pretty, they could get bright enough that looking at them was like staring into the sun. Tempting, sure, but definitely not recommended. As a pro hero, she had used it to blind and disorient her opponents, leading to a high rate of capture. The drawbacks, of course, were that if Glimmer wasn't careful she could permanently blind villains, bystanders, or even herself. She had to carefully manipulate the light of her quirk to make sure that it was bright enough to be effective without causing permanent damage, which was a pretty fine line. She wasn't a well-known hero, but from what Izuku knew about her, she had done her job well. All of that was common knowledge, though, if someone knew where to look, so while it was necessary to list that out, Izuku didn't think that basic level of analysis would help him stand out. But what else? Well, he was supposed to give suggestions, right? It felt kind of blasphemous to give suggestions to such a successful pro hero, but Izuku forced himself to look at it like it was any other quirk. The test hadn't actually specified that the quirk belonged to a pro, after all, so he couldn't let that hold back his analysis. Not to mention that if he was accepted into the support course, he'd be giving pros suggestions for a living. So how could the quirk go beyond what Glimmer had used it for? Well, she manipulated light energy, right? But Izuku's eyes widened and he started writing the ideas as fast as he could structure them out. Not all light was visible, so what if she could manipulate not only the intensity of the lights but also the wavelength? From the footage he'd seen, some of the sparkles Glimmer had used had appeared colorful, especially that one time she'd produced rainbow sparkles during a pride parade, so it was definitely possible for her to shift the wavelength within the visible spectrum. And if she could do that much, she could probably train enough to create ultraviolet light and infrared light, which meant that she could use her quirk to burn rather than blind and maybe even use it like a black light to find forensic evidence at crime scenes. In the end, Izuku's essay ended up being 3 pages long, 2 of which were entirely suggestions based on his theory that Glimmer could manipulate the wavelength of light. It really made him wonder why she'd never used it that way. It would have effectively negated a lot of the drawbacks of her quirk, since she wouldn't have had to worry about blinding anyone if her light was invisible. It would also make her much more difficult to fight, since the threats wouldn't be as obvious. It was almost a shame that she had already retired, because Izuku would have loved to see if any of his theories were actually useful. He didn't recognize the other quirk, so he didn't have the advantage of previous knowledge, but then again, he also didn't go into the analysis with any biases, so it all balanced out. It was some sort of jet quirk that allowed the user to blow air out of the bottoms of their feet, which would probably be most useful for speed or maybe even for flight, depending on how long the hero could keep continuously blowing air. They would need specialized shoes that protected their feet while still allowing the air to flow, and the rest of their costume might need extra ventilation as well, depending on where the air came from. It was probable that the quirk actually worked by taking air in through the skin to power the quirk, or maybe it was powered by the breath. If the hero could manipulate the temperature of the air, that opened a whole new field of opportunities. He could use hot air to make himself rise faster, or cool air to help victims during fire rescues. There were just so many possibilities, but Izuku limited those speculations to less than a page. He didn't know if temperature manipulation was actually within the limits of the quirk, so he didn't want to waste too much time on suggestions that might not actually be useful. Instead, Izuku tried to focus his analysis on ideas that were possible with only the information he'd been given. Beyond mobility, the quirk could probably be used to impair an opponent's vision, since if the hero could aim the jets at a villain's eyes, it would dry them out pretty quickly. It would be difficult to keep one's eyes open in a targeted windstorm, but even a brief puff to the face would force the villain to blink, which could make him a perfect counter to Eraserhead if he came up on him from behind. Izuku debated about whether he should actually include that tidbit before deciding to just leave it in. It probably wasn't necessary, but at the same time, any little bit of information could mean the difference between being accepted to his dream school or having to find a third dream in under a year, so Izuku didn't want to take any chances. It couldn't hurt, right? Unless they thought it was creepy. What if they thought he was creepy? But then again, the entire analysis section was kinda creepy, just by the way it was designed. But what if his classmates were right and his notebooks weren't useful at all and he made UA hate him because he saw too many weaknesses in the quirks they gave him? Izuku hurried and finished the essay before he could work himself into a panic about it and used the rest of the time to check his answers in the general section as a way to distract himself. He was already here at UA, taking the entrance exam, so it was way too late to second-guess himself now, right? And maybe UA would be like Mei, who didn't think he was creepy at all, but maybe that was because Mei was a little creepy herself? By the time Power Loader announced the end of the test, Izuku had successfully talked himself down from his anxiety attack. Ectoplasm must be one of the teachers at UA, because it was his clones that came to collect everyone's tests once time was called. It was kind of surreal that there were so many real pro heroes in the building right now. Izuku hoped that, if he actually got into UA, he'd be able to rein in his inner fanboy enough to not make a fool of himself around every single one of the teachers. Oh boy, yeah, that was going to be difficult. As soon as Ectoplasm grabbed her test, Mei was immediately back in Izuku's personal space, grinning like a mad woman. How did you do, Izuku-an? I bet those analysis questions were a piece of cake for you, huh? I could make so many babies to help those heroes. It's amazing. I already have so many ideas. Maybe that's what I'll build in the practical, but I have so many other baby ideas too. Oh, this is gonna be so much fun. Izuku couldn't help smiling as Mei cackled, even if the other examinees were shooting them strange looks, but her ramblings reminded him that he still didn't know what his practical exam was going to be. Analysts didn't have anything physical to show off, unlike inventors and designers, so what were they going to ask him to do? And why didn't Power Loader mention it along with the other courses? After a few minutes, they were excused to make their way to the practical exams, and there was a flurry of movement as all the examinees stretched and gathered their things to leave the room. Izuku turned to Mei and smiled. Good luck on your practical, Mei. I hope you make it in. My babies are amazing. The proctors won't be able to ignore them. Mei declared confidently. And you're not allowed to fail either, Izuku-an. You have to make it into UA so we can make awesome babies together. Izuku sputtered and turned red, but Mei was already skipping toward the doors. He was definitely going to have to get used to the way she phrased things. Did she even realize how she sounded, or did she just not care? Honestly, from what Izuku had seen from her so far, it could be either one. Still, it was comforting to know that he'd have at least one friend if he made it into the support course. Well, one person who didn't hate him at the very least. That was going to be weird. Izuku shook his head and grabbed his bag, then made his way to the front of the room, where Power Loader was sitting at a large desk next to the pro hero Midnight, who must have arrived sometime while they were taking the written exam. Izuku didn't want to interrupt their conversation, but he also didn't want to be late to the practical just because he didn't know where it was. There was a possibility that there were signs outside that he could follow, since that seemed to be the case for the invention and design tracks, but considering that Powerloader hadn't even mentioned the analysis track since Izuku had arrived, he wasn't willing to bet on that. Izuku hesitated another moment before speaking. He was gonna feel so stupid if they told him to just follow the signs. Excuse me? Midnight stopped halfway through whatever story she had been telling, and both heroes turned to look at Izuku, who fidgeted in place at the sudden attention. Hey, hot stuff. Midnight purred. What can we do for you? I was just wondering, Izuku grimaced. Way to make a good first impression. Do you know where the intelligence and analytics test will be? I mean, of course you know you're in charge, it's just that you didn't say anything about it, Powerloader, sir, so I, just was kinda confused and… Izuku trailed off awkwardly. The heroes seemed a little shocked, for some reason, but they didn't seem annoyed by his question, so that was something. Powerloader flipped through some papers on the desk in front of him before looking up at Izuku again. You're Izuku Midoriya, correct? Izuku nodded and the heroes shared a look that Izuku couldn't read before Powerloader turned back to him. Sorry for the confusion, Midoriya. It's just that most years, we don't actually have any applicants for that emphasis, so it's easy to forget it exists. Since you're the only one applying, it honestly slipped my mind, so I went on autopilot and gave the same spiel I give every year. Sorry. Oh. Izuku swallowed, suddenly even more insecure. I knew it wasn't as popular, but I thought there'd be at least a few others. Oh, you're so cute, I could just eat you up. Midnight cooed. Are you sure you don't want to switch to the design track? I'm a lot more fun than that scheming old rat. It. Izuku sputtered. T the rat. Powerloader glared at her. Sorry about her, Midnight teaches art here at UA, which puts her at the head of the design emphasis, which still doesn't give her any right to steal students from the rest of us. Midnight stuck her tongue out at him, but otherwise didn't interrupt. And most students who end up emphasizing in intelligence and analytics are recruited by Nedzu after they show potential in other courses. We're not used to people applying for analytics right off the bat. Izuku didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded. So, about the practical? I'll take him. Midnight squealed. We can get to know each other better. Don't you have your own practical to run? Powerloader said dryly. You'd better go before your students spread paint everywhere. I'll show Midoriya where to go. Let's be honest, if anyone is going to destroy the room, it's going to be your brats, not mine, but okay. Midnight pouted for a second, then shot Izuku a wink. Good luck, hot stuff. You're gonna need it. Ignore her. Powerloader said as he stood. She's just a tease. Izuku jogged after Powerloader as they walked through the maze of hallways to wherever they were going. No one had actually said where that was yet. His mind was still reeling from the revelation that he was the only applicant for intelligence and analytics. So, should I be worried? Powerloader shrugged. I honestly don't know. Like I said, most people don't apply to this track, so I don't actually know what the practical consists of, but you wouldn't have made it this far if you didn't have some kind of skill or interest in it, so you'll probably be fine. Do the other applicants usually make it in? Izuku asked. I know there's not many, but… Izuku was interrupted when a door in front of them swung open. When he glanced at Powerloader, the man looked tired, but not necessarily surprised, so Izuku turned back to the doorway, his eyes widening as he realized who exactly stood there. Hello, Midoriya. Nedzu's grin was wide enough for it to be slightly unsettling. You must be the one who was poking around my servers this morning. Izuku gaped at Nedzu, the Nedzu, principal of UA, and tried not to fanboy. He failed. Oh my goodness, you're Nedzu. One of the few animals with a quirk, although that is becoming more common as animals evolve alongside humans, but high specs gives you hyper-intelligence and… Suddenly, Izuku's brain caught up with his mouth and he realized exactly what Nedzu had just said, and you caught me trying to hack UA before I even took the entrance exam. He really was an idiot, just like Kaken said, wasn't he? He was going to get kicked out of UA before he even got accepted just because he'd gotten bored and decided to do something stupid. Of course, Power Loader wasn't leading him to his practical exam. He was taking him to the principal, who was going to press charges, and then he'd get a permanent record and nowhere else would accept him. And I'll leave him to you then. Good luck, Power Loader said. As he turned his back to leave, Izuku could have sworn he muttered something about the end of the world, but honestly, he was too scared of what was about to happen to pay much attention. He swallowed thickly and looked at the principal, who was still grinning at him. Maybe he was just waiting for Izuku to apologize? Well, apologizing couldn't make things worse, at least. Izuku lowered himself into a deep bow. I am so sorry, Principal Nedzu, sir. What I did was completely uncalled for and inappropriate. I wasn't thinking clearly, and obviously that's no excuse, but… Oh, there's no need for that, Midoriya. Nedzu chirped. In fact, what you did was quite impressive. Izuku straightened up in shock. The principal's expression was hard to read, on account of his face not being human, but he couldn't see any anger or malice. You're not mad. Oh no. Nedzu stepped aside and gestured for Izuku to come in. In fact, I was quite delighted. It's not often that people are brave enough to try, so it's quite fun to test my defenses against new faces. Izuku nodded numbly and sat in the chair Nedzu offered him. He still couldn't believe that he wasn't in trouble, but apparently May had been right about him making a good first impression. Or maybe Nedzu was just getting his hopes up to crush them later. It wouldn't be the first time. Nedzu carefully poured the tea and set a cup down in front of Izuku. So, how long have you been hacking? I think about 8 months. Izuku took the cup and held it while he waited for it to cool. I only picked it up after I decided to apply to the support course. I thought it'd be useful for information gathering. Oh, I agree completely. Nedzu chirped and took a sip of his tea. But I am surprised that you're still so new to it, considering your creativity this morning. Was applying to support a recent decision? Well, Izuku chuckled awkwardly. I thought that hero support was just inventing stuff. I didn't think to look into the analysis track until Sorry, I'm rambling, but well, since I really enjoy analyzing heroes and quirks, it just seemed perfect, I guess. Nedzu smiled knowingly. It's not often that we get young people applying to be analysts. Most people assume that support is simply invention of support items, like you did, and while analysis is an important part of creating those support items, many people overlook its potential in strategy and intelligence gathering. Speaking of your analysis, may I see your portfolio? Izuku nodded and dug the notebook out of his backpack to hand to Nedzu, who eagerly started leafing through it. Izuku wondered if he was just skimming his writing or if his quirk gave him the ability to speed read. If it was the latter, then how fast could he read? Was the speed limited by his quirk, or could he train himself to read even faster? If he wasn't limited by his brain, then his speed would probably be limited by how fast he could physically turn the pages. But if he was reading something that scrolled automatically, like on a computer, how would that affect the speed? I'm not as fast as all that, Midoriya. Nedzu chuckled. I still have to wait for my brain to catch up before I can turn the page, and while my quirk definitely helps, most of my speed reading is actually a skill I've cultivated. Izuku flushed red and slammed his mouth shut. Sorry, I know my muttering is creepy. On the contrary, it was a wonderful demonstration of your real-time analysis skills. Nedzu said simply, turning back to the portfolio, and while it will most likely be useful to learn to be aware of when you are muttering, there is nothing inherently wrong with the habit. Izuku's eyes widened and he stared at Nedzu silently while he finished the portfolio. His muttering wasn't bad? That just seemed so weird to him. Kaken had always said that it was annoying and creepy, but then again he'd said the same things about Izuku's notebooks. Maybe it was creepy if a hero did it, but was simply an eccentricity when an analyst did. That would make sense. Yeah, an eccentricity, not an annoying habit that he had to get rid of. Izuku liked that. Nedzu finally turned the final page of his portfolio and set it aside. This is quite impressive. I am assuming that you have been analyzing heroes for much longer than you've been hacking. Yes, sir. Izuku said. I started analyzing heroes as a hobby when I was 4, I just didn't realize it was a marketable skill. Would it be alright if I held on to this so I can peruse it more thoroughly at a later date? Nezu asked. Izuku nodded, a weird sense of pride growing in his chest the more the principal praised him. I already assumed that I wasn't going to be getting it back, since it's part of my application. Excellent. Nezu clapped his paws together. Now, you have your laptop with you, correct? Yes. Izuku dug out his laptop and set it on the desk in front of him. Perfect. Nezu said. Now onto the practical portion of your exam. Izuku swallowed nervously, thinking of all the ominous good luck wishes from Midnight and Power Loader. What will I be doing exactly? As I said, I was very impressed with your efforts this morning, so I simply want you to continue what you were doing then. Nezu's eyes twinkled with mischief. I want you to hack into you. Izuku blinked away tears of exhaustion and frustration as he limped away from UA, sore from sitting hunched over his laptop for the past few hours. He'd tried everything he could think of, every backdoor, every little trick, even a hastily made virus. But by the end of the exam, Izuku had barely made it past the first round of defenses. It didn't matter how much Nezu had enjoyed his portfolio, or how well he'd done on the written exam, he'd completely failed the practical. What was his mom going to think? After all these months of her going out of her way to support him, would they grow apart again? Would she be disappointed in him? Where was he going to go to school? What job would even take a stupid, weak, quirkless nobody like him? Suddenly, Izuku was rammed into by somebody going full speed. Immediately, he froze and curled in on himself to try to become a smaller target. Kaken shouldn't still be here, should he? Nezu had left sometime during Izuku's exam to go monitor the Hero Course practical, and Izuku had tried to use that time to hack UA using Nezu's computer but couldn't even crack the password. But Nezu had come back pretty quickly, so Kaken should already be at home by now. What if it was someone else who had learned he was quirkless and was going to beat him up and they'd never find his body and… Whoa, Izuku-kun, are you okay? What's wrong? Izuku jolted from his spiraling thoughts and looked around, but the only person near him was Mei, who currently had one hand resting on his shoulder. Oh, Mei running into him was actually completely in character, probably. It was just Mei, not Kaken. And Mei wasn't anything like Kaken, so she wasn't going to beat him up. Probably. Izuku forced a smile onto his face. Nothing. You just startled me is all. Mei frowned like she didn't believe him. Then what's with the tears? He tried, he really did, but he only lasted about 2 seconds before those stupid Midwariya tears were running down his face like some sort of stupid geyser. He hadn't even known this girl a full day and now he'd ruined their friendship or their partnership or whatever it was because here he was, crying in front of her and he just couldn't stop. Mei had started rubbing his shoulder sometime during his breakdown and was probably trying to be comforting, but her muttering about unleashing her babies on whoever hurt him was actually pretty intimidating. No one hurt me, Mei-chan. Izuku finally got out between the tears. It's my own fault anyway. Mei looked at him skeptically. Then what happened? That set off the tears again, but thankfully he could speak through them this time. Enedzu wanted me to hack UA for my practical B, but I couldn't do it. I failed. Oh. Mei sat down on the sidewalk and pulled him down next to her, ignoring the weird looks from the people passing by. Are you sure they didn't just want you to try? That made Izuku pause. What? Well, every failure is just a stepping stone to success, right? Mei said excitedly, and you said yourself that UA's cybersecurity is absolutely insane, so what if he was planning on you failing? Izuku just stared at her. If he wanted me to fail, then why did he tell me to succeed? Mei flicked him on the forehead, which was apparently her way of getting him out of his head and telling him that he was being an idiot. A lot of inventions are just about learning the process. Even if they don't work, they still weren't a waste of time because they make the next invention faster. UA's security wouldn't be the best in the business if a first year could ram through it, right? They probably just wanted to see how you approached a problem that you couldn't solve. They wanted to see your process. Izuku thought about that for a moment. It made a certain kind of sense, but then again, it seemed like everything Mei said towed the line between being reasonable and being absolutely insane, so maybe it was just that she was saying it that made it sound so believable. Still, it might make waiting for his rejection letter a little less painful. just so long as he was careful not to get his hopes up too high. If you say so, he said slowly, but what about you? How did your practical go? May grinned and immediately launched into a story that involved blowing up her workspace 3 times until she finally got a working prototype of hover boots 20 minutes before the end of the exam. Izuku listened and laughed with her until his tears dried and Mom started frantically texting him wondering when he was going to be home. By the time he started walking home, his heart was a little lighter than it had been, and his phone was a little heavier. It had a new number in it after all. The letter was heavier than he expected. Well, logically, Izuku knew that the envelope was probably stuffed with all sorts of paperwork for if he was accepted, or maybe resources for if he wasn't, so it made sense for it to weigh something, but for some reason, it felt heavier than just paper. Or maybe that was an emotional reaction to the tension he'd been feeling ever since Mom had run in from getting the mail. This letter was going to determine the rest of his future. This would determine if he remained a worthless loser or if he went to All Might's alma mater to become a professional analyst, so no wonder the envelope felt so heavy. Mom hovered nervously, wringing her hands as she waited for him to open it. A few months ago, he probably would have gone to his room to be alone, but she had been just as involved in his preparation for the entrance exam as he had been, and honestly, after bombing the practical, he could really use the support. Izuku, Mom said finally. It's not going to get any easier if you wait. Izuku nodded and took a deep breath, then closed his eyes and ripped the envelope open like he was taking off a band-aid. There was a metallic thud that made Izuku open his eyes as something inside fell out and hit the coffee table. Is that a hologram? Projector? Almost as soon as he said that, the disc came to life and a small screen appeared. Power Loader was staring right at the camera, looking somewhat tired, which made sense if he'd had to make one of these for every student in the support course. Izuku Midoriya. Power Loader began. You passed the written exam with flying colors and turned in an impressive portfolio. However, I have been told that during the practical exam, you did not succeed in hacking UA. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes and he could feel Mom looking at him with pity as he stared at the ground. Of course he knew that he'd failed the exam. As much as he wanted to believe that May had been right about them not expecting him to succeed, he hadn't been able to push away the dread whenever he thought about the test. He really was a failure. He was a quirkless nobody, just like Kakin always said. I'm glad. Izuku whipped his head up fast enough to almost give him whiplash. Was Power Loader glad he didn't make it into UA? Was he rubbing it in? That didn't seem like appropriate behavior for a pro hero. If you had succeeded, I would honestly be concerned about the quality of our school's defenses. Power Loader chucked. Thankfully, Nedza didn't actually expect you to succeed. He simply set the task as a way to gauge your skill and drive, even though your portfolio was impressive enough to guarantee your admittance without any need for a practical. Take it from someone who has been working under him for quite a while now. Impressing Nedza like that is no easy feat he seems to have. Power Loader shivered almost imperceptibly. Special plans to help you realize your potential. Izuku held his breath as Power Loader gave a tired smile. As the head of the support course at UA, welcome, Izuku Midoriya. This is your support academia. Izuku's jaw dropped and he kept staring at the screen as Mom cried and hugged him tightly. He made it. He made it. He was going to UA. He did it. Oh, wait, Power Loader was still talking. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, there's a few housekeeping items I need to tell you about. There are 3 first-year support classes at UA. Classes 1F and 1G cater to the invention track, while Class 1H focuses primarily on design. Because of the rarity of students entering the intelligence and analytics track, you have been assigned to Class 1F with the invention students. Your projects and assignments will, of course, be modified to fit your emphasis, and you'll also have daily lessons with Principal Nedzu, but you will still need to pass the lab safety test on UA's website before school starts, since 1F meets in a lab rather than a traditional classroom. Please fill out the forms included with your acceptance letter to inform us of any equipment or materials you need so we can have those ready for you on the first day of class. Congratulations, Midoriya. I look forward to seeing you in my class. You did it, baby. Mom hadn't stopped hugging him since Power Loader had said he was accepted. You worked so hard. I'm so proud of you. That was what finally pushed Izuku over the edge into tears of his own. He had had no idea how much he needed to hear that. All those years of her apologizing for him being quirkless and telling him to choose a different dream were over. His mom believed in him now. She was proud of him. That felt almost as good as being told he actually got accepted into UA. Izuku? Mom said, I think your phone is vibrating. Izuku listened and sure enough, there was a faint vibrating noise. He looked around to see that his phone had fallen out of his pocket and was sitting on the couch beside him. Who would even be calling him? Kaken was the only one at school who had his number, but Izuku was half convinced he had deleted it as soon as Auntie Mitsuki had forced him to put it in his phone. Hesitantly, Izuku answered the call. I got in. He didn't even get a chance to say hello before Mei was shouting in his ear. I got in, Izuku-kun. I'm going to you. Izuku couldn't help the grin that spread across his face. Congratulations, Mei-chan. I knew you could do it. Mom looked very confused and Izuku suddenly realized that in his post-exam depressive haze, not only had he almost forgotten about giving Mei his number, he'd also completely forgotten to tell Mom that he met Mei at all. He'd been so depressed when he came home after failing the practical that he'd gone straight to his room, and then he'd spent the rest of the wait trying not to think about it, especially since he was never going to see her again if he didn't make it into UA. Now he had to explain who this random girl was to his mom. Awkward. He pulled the phone away from his mouth and spoke quietly. Mei-chan is, well, Mei was acting like they were friends, but he still didn't want to assume anything. We met at the entrance exam. Mom nodded in understanding, but still seemed a little nervous. What about you, Izuku-kun? The question made Izuku tune back into Mei's ramblings. Did you pass? Because if you didn't, I'm gonna march straight into UA and tell them that. No. Izuku screamed, but then realized that could be taken the wrong way. I mean no, please don't do that, Mei-chan. I got in. Apparently, my final was just a formality and they didn't actually expect me to succeed. I told you so. Mei cackled. I knew they wouldn't fail you. That would be like ignoring my perfect babies. So what class are you gonna be in? Are you gonna be with all the other analysis students? Actually, I'm the only one, so they put me in an invention class. Izuku said nervously, I'm in 1F. There was a beat of silence and Izuku was just starting to wonder if he'd somehow said something wrong when Hatsum squealed so loud that he had to hold the phone at arm's length just to avoid going deaf. Mom kept looking between him and the phone, obviously concerned. Is she okay? Izuku shrugged. Helplessly, I think she might just be excited. I'm in 1F too. Mei screamed. We're in the same class. Izuku blinked in shock for a moment. He was going to have a friend in class. That hadn't happened since it depended on if he was counting Kaken as a friend. They'd been in plenty of classes together, but it definitely wasn't enjoyable, or at least not as enjoyable Ash thought being in a class with Mei would be, so he wasn't sure if that counted. Izuku grinned. He was finally going to be in the same class as a friend. Well, if they were actually friends. We should do something to celebrate. Mei declared. Oh. Izuku held the phone away from his mouth again and glanced at Mom. Would you mind if I went to hang out with Mei-chan? She wants to celebrate us getting in. Mom frowned for a moment. Does she want to come over for dinner? If she's your friend, I want to meet her. I could make your favorites. Izuku hesitated. Was inviting her over weird? He couldn't imagine inviting anyone from his middle school over, and Kaken would probably laugh at Mom insisting she meet his new friend, but Mei didn't seem like the type to get embarrassed by societal norms like that, so she probably wouldn't care. I guess I can ask her. 20 minutes later, Izuku was frantically cleaning the kitchen while Mom started dinner. What if Mei thought their house was too dirty? What if she thought it was in a bad part of town? What if she saw the pictures of 4-year-old Izuku in an all-might onesie and never wanted to talk to him again? They were in the same class. He'd have to be careful to always sit on the other side of the room, or maybe behind her so she didn't have to see his face. Was it safer to take the pictures down? Yes, definitely safer to take the pictures down. Oh no, that was a knock. Too late. Abort mission. They both ran to answer the door, but before Mom could open it, Izuku suddenly grabbed her hand. Before you meet Mei, I kinda need to warn you about something. Mom looked worried. Does she have tattoos or something? No, nothing like that. Izuku said frantically. It's just she calls her inventions her babies. Why would you need to warn me about? Izuku opened the door before she could finish and immediately got an armful of excitable Meichan. Izuku-kun. This year is gonna be so much fun. Izuku willed his face to go back to a normal color as he pried her away from him. This is my mom. Mom, this is Mei-chan. Mei's eyes lit up and she ran up to Mom, practically vibrating with excitement. It's awesome to meet you, Midoriya-san. Your son and I are gonna make so many beautiful babies together. Mom immediately choked and stared at her in shock before she connected the dots. She visually relaxed and sighed in relief. Oh, that's what you meant, Izuku. I see why you warned me. And yes, Izuku seems to be looking forward to working with you too. Good. Mei grinned. I'm so excited to see what babies I can make with your son's awesome brains. Did you teach him how to do that? Mom still seemed a little overwhelmed by Mei's energy. What? I think she means my analysis, Mom. Izuku came to her rescue, or did you mean the hacking? Both. Oh, analysis has always been Izuku's hobby, really. Even as a kid, he was looking at quirks and writing notes about them. I didn't even know what he was doing until he showed me his first notebook. Mom said, and besides buying him notebooks and computer classes, it's all him. Wow, Mei said, I knew you were smart, Izuku-kun, but that's something else. You really taught yourself how to make your notebooks. Izuku nodded. I just always loved heroes, so it just kinda made sense. I've been doing them forever, so the first ones are really stupid and I think they're probably written in crayon. Cool, my first blueprints were the same. I knew they were blueprints, so I was very particular that I had to draw them with blue crayon. Mei grinned and Izuku was pleased to realize that Mom looked more at ease now that she'd had a chance to adjust to Mei's energy. So what's for dinner? Bakugo Katsuki and Izuku Midoriya, please report to the principal's office. Bakugo Katsuki and Izuku Midoriya. Izuku froze in his seat as the classroom exploded in whispers at the announcement. He hesitantly looked over at Kaken, but whipped his head down to look at the floor the second he saw the death glare that Kaken was leveling at him. Why were they being called down to the office? And together? Was this about? No, it couldn't be about the teasing. They'd never done anything about it before, so there wasn't any reason for them to do something now, especially now that Kaken had gotten into Yue's hero course. So that meant that Izuku was probably in trouble for something, but what? And why would Kaken have to come too? Izuku gathered his things and walked out into the hall, careful to keep a few steps behind Kaken so he didn't think Izuku was trying to get ahead of him. Unfortunately, his efforts to not make Kaken angry were in vain, because as soon as they'd turned the corner, Izuku found himself being slammed against the wall. What is this about, Deku? Kaken growled. What did you do? I don't know, I swear. Izuku held his bag securely against his chest so Kaken couldn't grab it, his eyes flicking down to the smoke billowing from his hand. Let's just go, we probably shouldn't keep the principal waiting. Kaken clicked his tongue dismissively, but released his hold on Izuku and kept walking toward the principal's office. Izuku took a deep breath to steady himself before hurrying after him, leaving a larger gap between them this time so he'd have a bit more warning if Kaken decided to confront him again. When they got to the office, Kaken knocked on the door and shot a warning glare back at Izuku before the door swung open. The principal was a man who really seemed too young to be balding, but that didn't stop him. Izuku had been to his office a few times in the past, none of which had necessarily been pleasant, so the smile on the principal's face didn't do anything to put him at ease. In fact, it made the whole thing more unsettling, because Izuku honestly couldn't think of a single reason why he'd be called down to the office if he wasn't in trouble. I just wanted to be the first person from our school to congratulate the both of you. The principal said, I can't believe we have not one, but 2 students from our school will be attending UA. And to think you're one of them, Midoriya? It's honestly a miracle. Izuku gulped as he felt the heat of Kaken's glare on him. Or maybe it was literal heat that had Kaken activated his quirk. He wouldn't do that in the principal's office, Would he? Would the principal let him get away with it? He didn't know why he'd assumed he'd be lucky enough to not have anyone at his middle school know he'd made it into UA. It had been so nice these past months with nobody knowing about his new dream, but of course Aldera had to have been sent their exam results. He'd been even more of an idiot for somehow not preparing for the eventuality of Kaken finding out. They were going to be attending the same high school, they'd run into each other eventually, even if they were in different courses. Well, there was nothing he could do about any of that now. Izuku forced a shaky smile onto his face. "Thank you, sir. I hope we'll make you proud." The principal nodded and gestured for them to leave. Izuku stood awkwardly for a second, waiting for Kaken to leave first, but he just kept glaring at him until Izuku finally gave in and scurried toward the door. He just wanted to go back to class and pretend that the principal hadn't known exactly what he was doing by calling both of them into the office at the same time. He wanted to pretend that his new dream was still safe. He wanted to pretend that Kaken was like May and was excited that they'd be going to the same school, rather than enraged. Instead, reality grabbed him roughly by the arm and dragged him outside, taking him straight to an alcove behind the locker rooms that didn't have any cameras. At this time of day, even if Kaken let loose explosions, no one would be on the other side to hear them, which also meant that no one would be around to hear Izuku's screams. Not that they'd help him if they did hear, but it was the principle of the thing. Izuku couldn't hold back a sharp cry as he was shoved against the wall for the second time in 10 minutes. Kaken glared down at him, and this time Izuku knew that the heat wasn't just from his glare as he felt the skin on his chest blistering where Kaken's hand was holding his shirt. "I thought you'd given up on being a hero, nerd." Izuku trembled as he realized he'd never actually seen Kaken this angry before. This was bad. Even worse than usual. What would happen if Kaken killed him? Would they give his place at UA to someone else? Would May find someone else to make inventions with? Would anyone even notice he was gone? "I bet you've had a great time laughing behind my back these past couple of months, haven't you?" Kaken sneered. "Pretending to have given up, when really you were lying to us the whole time. How'd you even pass the exam, you demon nerd?" Izuku hissed in pain as Kaken let loose an explosion to his chest. "I was supposed to be the first and only student from this crappy school to make it into UA, and you had to go and ruin it." Kaken yelled. "Well, I hope your fun was worth it because it's over, Deku. I don't care if you somehow cheated and made it into UA, you're not gonna be a hero." "I'm in the support course, Kaken," Izuku yelled. He was trembling from the pain, the anxiety, and now the emotional exertion it took to yell at his oldest friend. "I didn't lie to you, Katsuki. I gave up on being a hero months ago. I didn't even try the hero course exam like you did, so don't get angry at me for chasing a dream that doesn't even affect you." He grabbed the arm that was holding him against the wall and shoved it away, then ran as fast as he could away from the school. He'd undoubtedly get in trouble for skipping class, but they wouldn't risk suspending him or punishing him too drastically now that he'd be attending UA. They wanted the positive attention too badly for that. Maybe that was why they'd let Katsuki get away with everything they did, because he was the student with the greatest chance of making it big. Izuku could hardly see through his tears as he ran home on autopilot, shooting a text to May for her to call him when she had a minute. He didn't know what he'd say if she called, there were too many emotions for him to process alone. Thankfully, Mom was at work, so he didn't have to worry about her seeing him barge through the door with tears running down his face as he went straight to the bathroom to bandage the ugly burn on his chest. To his surprise, Izuku's phone rang just as he was about to take off his uniform. He looked at the screen to see May's name on caller ID. "Shouldn't you be in class right now? I told the teacher that I'd accidentally added an unstable component to my cell phone battery and it was going to explode if I didn't answer a call right away." May said, "I've actually done that before, so they didn't question it." "You've not actually blown up your phone by accident?" Izuku asked numbly. "It wasn't a very large explosion." May dismissed. "But what's going on? Your text sounded really upset and now your voice is doing that weird choky thing it does when you've been crying." Izuku tried to hold back a sob, but it tore itself out of his chest anyway. "Everyone at school found out I'm going to UA." There was a beat of silence at the other end. "Isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't they be happy for you?" "No, you don't understand. Quirkless." Izuku yelled, then immediately felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over his head as he realized what he'd just said. He hadn't meant for her to know that. He hadn't thought and he'd been looking forward to having a friend. "I'm sorry. I'll just let you go, you didn't need to leave class and you don't have to call me again, I'm sorry." "Oh no. Izuku hacker Midoriya, don't you dare hang up on me." Izuku stopped with his thumb halfway to the end call button. Did you just use hacker as my middle name?" "Well, I don't know your real one, and I needed a placeholder to get the full effect." Mei explained. "So, Izuku hacker Midoriya, don't you dare think that I'm gonna abandon all the amazing babies we're gonna make together, just because you have some extra toe joint or whatever. I know for a fact that you're smarter than that, so I don't want to hear it." Izuku's jaw dropped and he gaped at his reflection in the mirror. What? You're still talking to me?" "Obviously." Mei huffed. "So, did one of your bullies get mad because you made it in?" Izuku put his phone on speaker so he could focus on treating his burn. "I don't know if bully's the right word. We used to be best friends, so it sounds so wrong to call him anything other than that, but we haven't really hung out since his quirk came in, so." "That was 10 years ago, Izuku-kun," Mei said bluntly. "What?" "That was 10 years ago." Mei repeated. "If you haven't hung out in 10 years, you're not still friends." "Did he hurt you?" Izuku hissed in pain as his shirt pulled away from the burned skin. "Today?" Mei made a little exasperated noise. "Ever?" Izuku looked at the angry red burn in the mirror. "Define hurt." Mei groaned. "For someone who is so smart, you really are an idiot. Are you in pain right now? If I say no, are you going to believe me?" "Not a chance in hell, Izuku-kun." Izuku grimaced. "Then yes." Mei sighed. "I'm gonna kill him. He did that just because you got into UA and he didn't." "Oh no, he got in too." Izuku ran a washcloth under cold water. "He's in the hero course, that's part of why he's so angry." "They let your bully into the hero course?" Mei yelled so loudly that the audio on the phone crackled. "Like I said, bully isn't really the right word. Just because you were friends once doesn't mean he's not a bully, Izuku-kun," Mei said, then continued more quietly. "It also doesn't mean you deserved it." Izuku's hands stuttered to a stop from where he'd been gently patting the washcloth to his chest. "What?" "You don't deserve the way he treats you, Izuku-kun," Mei said. "What's his excuse? That you don't have a quirk? Not your fault. Try again." Izuku thought for a moment. "Until about a year ago, I still wanted to be a hero despite that?" "Not a crime," Mei said. "Tons of kids want to be heroes. Try again." Izuku was starting to smile in spite of himself. "I kept complimenting his quirk, which he somehow interpreted as me thinking I was better than him. That I'm not even gonna try, this guy's an idiot." Next, Izuku laughed. That I kept following him around like a lost puppy? Anyone would be lucky to have your brilliant mind behind them." Mei said. "Any other complaints?" Izuku hesitated. He knew that it'd probably make Mei laugh, but it felt almost blasphemous to say, "He's AD dash?" Ding, ding, ding. Mei cackled. "We have a winner." "For real, though, Izuku-kun, that guy is a JRK and if he ever comes to me for babies I'll dogile." Izuku wasn't sure he actually wanted to know. "You'll what?" "I'll use cheap materials." Mei blurted. "No, I can't do that. My babies deserve only the best." "Ugh, I'll figure it out, but it won't be pretty." Izuku laughed. "Thanks, Mei, that means a lot." "So, are you feeling any better?" Izuku shrugged as he spread burn cream on his chest. "It was definitely going to scar. I don't know. I just wish he hadn't taken it so personally, you know? I wasn't even trying to get into the hero course." Izuku's sadness had slowly been pushed away by Mei's enthusiasm, and it was quickly being replaced by something he wasn't used to letting himself feel. Anger. "Couldn't he just let me have this one thing without ruining it?" Izuku ranted. "I mean, he already made sure I knew my last dream was a big fat pile of nothing, so couldn't he just be happy with that? He has to ruin my new one too." "Then don't let him," Mei said. "It's your dream, not his, so that bully doesn't get any say." You're gonna be an amazing support analyst, Izuku-in, and he can't do a thing about it. Izuku finished wrapping the bandages around his chest and grabbed the phone as he headed to his room to pick out a t-shirt. I don't know. It feels like he can. I know, Mei said. But hey, now you have me and we're friends, and I'm not gonna let you give up. We're gonna take UA by storm and that guy is gonna regret ever hurting you, okay? Izuku chucked, okay. Good. Mei said resolutely. Now, did you find anything else out about that jet quirk from the exam? My hoverboot babies are having problems staying in the air. Izuku did his best to stare straight ahead and not give in to the temptation to hunch his shoulders in an attempt to make himself a smaller target. As he predicted, the news that he got into UA had spread like wildfire since yesterday, though Izuku didn't know if that was Katsuki's fault or the principal's. The moment he'd arrived, Izuku had felt dozens of eyes on him, and even now after half a day, his classmates just wouldn't stop staring. Some seemed angry, like Katsuki, but most simply thought he was lying for attention. Worthless Deku. He's just gonna drag you down. Do you actually think he got in? Someone in my science class said it'd be possible to forge an acceptance letter if you were stupid enough to try. Even if he did get in, it's not like he's gonna stay there, right? UA is for the best and the brightest, so I bet they'll expel Deku on the first day. Izuku actually kind of wished they'd actually say what they wanted to his face instead of whispering it as he walked by. It wasn't like they didn't know he could hear him, so really, it'd just be easier if they were upfront about it, if only so Izuku didn't have to feign ignorance. Maybe part of the reason Mei was so easy to be friends with was because she was so upfront about things. She might have a weird way of saying things, but Izuku was almost certain that she'd never lie to him, even to spare his feelings. If he asked her, she'd most likely say something about incorrect data making for bad inventions, but at least Izuku could trust her. Probably. Izuku sighed in relief as he walked out the front doors, grateful to finally be away from his classmates. It was only a couple more days until the end of the school year, and then he'd start UA with Mei, so he could handle it until then. He could handle it. He'd already gone through so much worse. He didn't run into any hero fights on his way home, so maybe he wasn't paying as much attention to his surroundings as he should have been, and it came as a surprise to him when he turned a corner only to see Katsuki leaning against the wall, backed by two of his cronies. When Katsuki saw him, his eyes narrowed, but he didn't explode. Izuku froze momentarily before forcing himself to relax. It wasn't his fault that Katsuki was mean, he just had to keep reminding himself of that. Katsuki pushed himself off the wall and glowered at Izuku. Where the F did you go yesterday, you dim nerd? Izuku did his best to channel his inner Mei as he responded, I went home, Katsuki. That tends to happen after one gets cornered behind the school, but of course, you wouldn't know a thing about that, would you? He was prepared to dart away the moment Katsuki's cronies gave him an opening, but they were flanking him on either side and Katsuki himself was blocking his way forward. Izuku had been expecting him to explode at his last comment, but to his surprise, Katsuki was quiet. It was terrifying. Izuku knew how to deal with a screaming Katsuki, he even knew how to deal with an exploding Katsuki, even if that almost always ended up with him getting hurt, but this was new. It wasn't that Katsuki wasn't angry, but that anger was simmering beneath the surface in a type of cold rage and some other emotion Izuku couldn't place. Maybe confusion? Was Katsuki confused about Izuku talking back to him? Or maybe he didn't understand why he'd gone home yesterday. There wasn't much point in thinking about it right now, because ultimately, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Izuku got away from here before he got hurt again. Well, Izuku forced a wobbly smile onto his face, trying his best to imitate Mei's confidence. If that's all you wanted to ask me, then we should all probably be getting home. Katsuki looked at him intensely for a moment before scoffing. So, are you some sort of shitty inventor now or something? Took Izuku a moment to realize that Katsuki was talking about the support course. Of course, he'd made the same assumption that Izuku had at first, but he didn't really know if it was smart to let Katsuki know anything more than he had to about his new dream. What's it to you? You're going to be a hero, Katsuki. I'm not. Isn't that good enough for you? I told you not to apply. Katsuki growled. Izuku felt a swell of anger and recognized the feeling from his phone call with Mei yesterday. It wasn't his fault that Katsuki was a JRK, so it wasn't his responsibility to avoid setting him off. "I'm not one of your cronies, Katsuki. You don't control me." A few small explosions popped in Katsuki's hand, but instead of being afraid, all Izuku could think about was the fact that Mei had apparently accidentally blown up her phone at least once. Hope mingled itself with the anger. Maybe if he hung around her enough, explosions would take on a different meaning. Maybe eventually he'd come to associate them with friendship and acceptance, rather than disappointment and pain. Izuku squared his shoulders. "Katsuki? What the F is up with that, Deku?" Katsuki interrupted. "Why the hell are you calling me Katsuki all of a sudden? I thought you were still using that stupid nickname." Izuku took a step back. For some reason he hadn't realized that Katsuki would even notice the change. He was just a pebble on the side of Katsuki's road to greatness, so what did it even matter what Izuku called him? But apparently, nothing that Katsuki did made sense. He was angry when Izuku called him Kaken, and he was angry when he didn't. There was no way for Izuku to win, and honestly he was sick of trying. "People have nicknames for their friends, Katsuki," Izuku said lowly. "And we're not friends anymore." Katsuki glared at him, but Izuku held his ground. He wasn't going to look away first. He wasn't going to let Katsuki win this one. Eventually Katsuki scoffed and stepped aside. "Whatever, Deku. Like I care what you do." Izuku gripped the straps of his backpack and walked past him, tense as he anticipated an attack from behind. Katsuki, however, seemed just as tense. He might be pretending like he didn't care and that was why he was letting this go, but Izuku knew the truth. He had won. It filled him with an unfamiliar sense of victory and accomplishment that he'd only ever experienced when analyzing or hacking. It gave him the confidence to stop walking a few steps past Katsuki and turn around. Maybe it was petty and more than a little stupid, but Izuku wanted the last word. "Oh, and Katsuki?" Izuku smiled slightly as they made direct eye contact. "I'm not going to be a shitty inventor. I'm going to be a shitty analyst. Turns out, some people actually like my creepy stalker notebooks." He turned and started walking away, promising himself that he'd have a panic attack when he got home. "See you at you, Katsuki." Katsuki didn't follow him. Izuku tugged at the knot of his tie again, trying to get it to vaguely resemble a triangle at the very least, and tried to ignore Katsuki, who was glaring at him from the other end of the train. It was just his luck that they'd left at the same time and ended up in the same car, but from the map of UA he'd been sent alongside his acceptance letter, the support classes were in an entirely different part of the building than the hero courses, so they would have to head in separate directions almost as soon as they arrived, and then he could meet up with Mei. Easy as pie. Even though he'd already been there for the entrance exams, walking into UA as a student was an overwhelming experience. He hadn't even realized he'd stopped just outside the door until Katsuki roughly shoulder-checked him, knocking him over the threshold. "Stay out of my way, Deku." Izuku instinctively tensed, wondering if Katsuki had finally had enough of his new attitude and he was actually going to die before classes even started, but Katsuki just walked away, not even sparing Izuku a backward glance as he headed toward the hero course. He supposed that even Katsuki wasn't overconfident enough to attack him in the halls of the best hero school in Japan, where a pro hero could walk around the corner at any minute. Still, Izuku would have to start leaving earlier if he wanted to avoid being jumped outside the gates. As soon as Katsuki was finally out of sight, Izuku let out a breath of relief and walked in the opposite direction, relying on the map he'd memorized to find his way to Class 1F. The school was a little like a maze, and Izuku wondered how much of that was intentional. It must make it more difficult for villains to find their way around if they ever got inside, or maybe Nedzu had just remodeled the school this way to get some petty revenge on humans and let them know what running a maze felt like. Honestly, it was probably both. Eventually, Izuku found the correct hallway and was met with an armful of Mei as soon as he turned the corner. "Why are our teachers so cruel, Izuku-an?" Mei sobbed into his shoulder. Izuku's mind started racing. Were the teachers here going to be like the ones at Aldera? He just assumed that they'd be kinder because they were pro-heroes and were supposed to save people, but what if they were just as bad? No, they'd be worse because they had more training. Before his brain could even fully process those thoughts, Mei started speaking again. They locked the lab and won't let us in until the teacher gets here. Why, Izuku-an? I need to make my babies. Izuku practically melted in relief. Their teachers weren't actually cruel. It was just Mei being Mei. Not that her outrage didn't make sense. It just wasn't as objectively bad as what Izuku had been thinking. The lab being locked might be an inconvenience, but it wouldn't feel like the end of the world to anyone else besides her. Mei, it's the first day. Izuku reminded her gently, and don't pretend that you wouldn't. Just blow something up if you were allowed in right now. It's part of my process, Izuku-an. Mei insisted. You can't have success without a little failure. Maybe so, Izuku said patiently, but it still makes sense for them to want to supervise us until they know we can handle ourselves. She pouted at that, but relented and pulled him by the wrist to sit on the hallway floor next to a few other kids who must be their future classmates. They'd been staring, something Izuku was sure he'd get more used to the longer he hung out with Mei, but they quickly looked away when they noticed him glancing their way. Mei pulled out a sketchbook and started sketching out diagrams for her latest invention while Izuku immediately took advantage of the time to analyze their classmates' quirks, or at least those that were obvious from a glance, which surprisingly wasn't that many. There were only 2 students with obvious mutations and the rest looked normal, but Izuku supposed that less obvious mutations, like the crosshairs in Mei's eyes, might not be easy to see unless he actually had a conversation with them and had an opportunity to get up close and personal. Of the 2 with mutation quirks, one had a mutation similar to Gang Orca but with head of a great white shark rather than a killer whale, and the other had large pointed ears and a bald head, though Izuku didn't know if the baldness was quirk-related or a stylistic choice. Wait a second, he didn't have eyebrows either, which meant that it was most likely due to his quirk. Izuku-an, you're muttering again. Mei said distractedly. Izuku jolted and realized that the kid with the pointed ears was blushing and the rest of the class was looking at him nervously. Oh, Izuku smiled awkwardly at the kid, sorry. I'm trying to be more aware of when I'm doing that. But I would be interested if you want to tell me. The kid looked like he really didn't, but also didn't know how to say no. I just have alopecia. I don't think it's linked to my quirk, but it might be, since a couple other people in my family have it too, and we all have similar quirks. He trailed off, and as much as Izuku wanted to ask what his quirk was, he didn't want their classmates to think he was creepy. Actually, it was probably too late for that, since the rest of the students in the hallway already seemed to be avoiding him and Mei. Still, the kid probably didn't feel comfortable telling Izuku his quirk, so he shouldn't press the issue. It would most likely come up eventually anyway, since most classes shared their name and quirk on the first day, something that he wasn't looking forward to at all. At least he wouldn't lose any friends when it came out that he was quirkless. Izuku-an, Mei asked suddenly, did you see that Kamui would fight yesterday? Izuku nodded eagerly, grateful for the distraction. It was against that tortoise villain, right? Yep. Mei confirmed. So, what did you think? He thought for a moment. Well, it wasn't a good matchup, at least not with how the 2 currently fight. Kamui's strengths are speed and capture, so Shellshock's natural slowness put him at a huge disadvantage. It could have gone a lot differently though. His shell is hard enough that physical attacks are useless against it, not that that would have helped against Kamui's lacquered chain prison, but if he had thought to use his shell as a bludgeoning weapon, he probably could have broken out of even that trap fairly easily. One of Kamui's major weaknesses is how soft his wood is, since it has to grow so fast. Mei grinned and wrote something down. What do you think of turtle shell armor? Izuku grimaced and shook his head. Too heavy. There's a reason why tortoises are so slow. Turtles, however, can move pretty quickly in water, so the idea might be more practical for a water combat hero like Selkie. And if there are air chambers to help with buoyancy, the armor won't sink even if it's heavy. Mei brainstormed happily. She scribbled out some of the things she'd already written down and turned to a new page of her sketchbook. They spent the rest of their wait discussing various hero fights Izuku had seen that week and discussing how to mimic the strengths or cover their weaknesses of both the heroes and villains. Izuku was vaguely aware of their classmates discreetly edging away from them, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Katsuki and their old classmates had already made it wonderfully clear how creepy his notebooks were, but Izuku was at UA to become the best analyst he could be, so he wasn't about to let some judgmental classmates hold him back. He was honestly just lucky that Mei had sat next to him at the exams. He probably still would have met her, since they were in the same class and everything, but he would have been about 1,000 times more nervous. The bell rang right as Power Loader rounded the corner. Mei immediately shoved her sketchbook into Izuku's hands and jumped to her feet, running up to their new homeroom teacher so quickly that she almost ran into him. "Are you gonna open the lab now? Can we get straight to work? When can I start making my babies?" Power Loader took a step back in shock, but then sighed in resignation, making Izuku giggle softly. He must have gotten a taste of Mei's antics during the invention practical, which must have been a total nightmare because he knew for a fact that Mei had caused at least one explosion during the test. "Poor guy. Hatsum, please calm down," Power Loader pleaded. "And yes, we'll be going in the room in a few minutes, but I have some things to explain first." Mei looked like she was about to argue, so Izuku stood up and tugged on her arm. "Come on, just be patient a little longer, okay, Mei-chan?" Mei pouted and plopped down on the floor again. "Okay, but if he takes too long, I'm picking the lock, okay?" Power Loader already looked done. "It's an electronic lock. You can't get in without it. Passcode. I'll just have Izuku hack it then. It'll take longer to hack the keypad than to listen to Power Loader." Izuku turned to their teacher. "I'm sorry about her, she's just been really looking forward to this." "It's fine." Power Loader sighed. "Okay, so for the rest of you, thanks for your patience. You all know me from the entrance exam, but I'll go ahead and introduce myself again anyway. I'm Power Loader, your homeroom teacher, and I am also the head of the support department here at UA. Yes, this includes all three emphases, though design and analysis each have a teacher that has responsibility for those students specifically." "Who are they?" a girl with brown curly hair asked. "Midnight's in charge of the design track," Izuku said. He remembered that much from their brief conversation as they were taking him to Nedzu's office. "As for analysis, I'm not quite sure, but I'm pretty sure it's Nedzu himself, right? I feel sorry for whoever's in the analysis track." The kid with the shark head shivered. "I've heard Nedzu's a total monster." Izuku frowned. He hadn't really talked to Nedzu that much, since he'd been more focused on trying to hack UA, but from their brief interaction, he hadn't seemed like a monster at all. If anything, he was just looking for some entertainment, since being so intelligent meant he got bored more quickly. He had heard that Nedzu could be a little scary, but so far, Izuku didn't see any reason to be afraid of him. "Can everyone just shut up so we can get this over with and get into the lab?" Mei complained loudly. Power Loader cleared his throat. Yes, of course. I'm sure you remember that we asked each of you what tools and materials you wanted, correct? Well, we've included those items in your personalized workstations. When you enter the lab, find the table with the tools you ordered. There's also a nameplate on each desk to make it easier and prevent confusion. We have to go to the opening ceremony in 20 minutes, but that time is yours to get familiar with the space and set up your station the way you like it. You've all already passed the lab safety test, but please be aware that if you are caught engaging in unsafe lab procedures, you will receive detention and a ban from the lab until you have demonstrated that you are willing to follow the rules." Power Loader looked at Mei as he said that last part, and Izuku had to hold back a laugh. Mei would never do anything to jeopardize her lab access. She would, however, bend the rules as far as they could go and use every loophole to her advantage, and Izuku would probably get dragged into helping her. So maybe the entrance exam hadn't been quite long enough for Power Loader to get to know her particular brand of idiosyncrasies after all. Oh well, he'd figure her out eventually. Power Loader entered the access code and Mei rushed past him the second the door was open, while Izuku followed with the rest of the class at a more sedate pace. The lab was large, with about 10 large workbenches that acted as desks. Support classes tended to be a little smaller than the average class because of the space and supervision needed, but Izuku didn't mind having fewer classmates. It just meant that there were fewer people to make fun of him. Mei was already elbows deep in her new tools, practically drooling as she pulled them from their boxes and started testing them out. Izuku simply chuckled and left her to it, since she probably wouldn't hear him if he started talking to her now anyway, and started looking for his own workspace. He had the feeling that most of his classmates were finding their tables primarily based on the unique tools they'd requested, but Izuku hadn't really known what to ask for. He was an analyst, not an inventor, so all he really needed was a computer with internet access and maybe some notebooks. He'd said as much in the request forms, but made sure to tell them that he already had his laptop and that he was more than used to buying his own notebooks, so they didn't have to go out of their way for him. Which meant that Izuku was looking for a mostly empty workbench. He walked around the room, watching as some of his classmates started finding their assigned areas, but every single one of the tables he could see was cluttered with tools and boxes. Maybe they just had too much stuff and had put some boxes on his table to keep them off the floor? That'd make sense. It wasn't as though Izuku needed a lot of space to do his thing anyway, since he was used to doing it running down the street while chasing hero fights. He was just glad to be useful, even if that usefulness was just lending some much-needed table space. So that meant that he'd have to rely on the little nameplates. He didn't want to bother anyone, so he went over to May's table so he knew what the nameplates looked like, since she wouldn't notice him and if she did, she wouldn't care. They were actually really nice, not that he expected anything less than the best from UA, but they each looked like engraved brass and had been screwed onto the table so they wouldn't fall off even if there were a strong breeze or, in May's case, an explosion. That was probably smart. Izuku walked around the room again, checking the nameplates on each of the tables that didn't have someone there already, only to come up empty. Power Loader had said Izuku was in class 1F, hadn't he? Had they changed his assignment at the last minute? What if they'd sent him an email and Izuku had missed it? What if they had just decided that he didn't need a desk? What if they'd decided to not let him into UA after all? Izuku shook his head and forced himself to take a deep breath. If they had decided to rescind his acceptance, the student ID they'd sent him wouldn't have let him pass the gate this morning. So he was still a student of UA and didn't have to worry about that, but he still had to find his desk. Maybe he should ask Power Loader? But he didn't want to bother him, and what if he realized how stupid Izuku was when he realized he couldn't even find his own desk and decided to expel him on the spot? It wouldn't hurt to do one more walk around the room and look at all the name tags again, right? Maybe he just missed something, maybe? Who the F is Izuku Midoriya and why does he need a whole but room? Izuku whirled around to look at the girl with brown curls, which now that he was thinking about it looked a lot like wire. Could that be her quirk? No. He couldn't get distracted by quirks right now. Anyway, she was the one who'd called out and gotten his attention. Actually, she'd gotten the attention of the whole class. Even May was looking over at her. Wait, did she say room? Izuku practically ran over to where the girl was gesturing to a door that was marked with the same nameplate as each of the desks, and sure enough, that was his name engraved on the metal. Izuku pushed past the girl, realizing too late that that was probably really rude, and rushed into the room, his room. The lights were off, but the room was illuminated by at least 5 monitors that Izuku could see, one of which was a giant flat screen that was mounted to the wall above the desk. There was a giant bookshelf against one of the side walls that was filled with notebooks, and Izuku's fingers twitched as he thought about filling all of them. He heard a whistle behind him, but couldn't pull his eyes away from the setup as May came up to stand beside him. Wow, Hacker-kun, he doesn't do anything halfway, do they? Please tell me I'm not dreaming, Mei-chan. Izuku said breathlessly. I didn't even request any of this. Yeah, sorry about that, Netsu went a little overboard. Izuku turned to see Power Loader leaning against the doorframe as the other students either crowded around him or looked in the windows that Izuku hadn't noticed that looked into the rest of the lab. Power Loader was smiling slightly, though it could have been in embarrassment or amusement at Izuku's reaction. Everyone, this is Izuku Midoriya, the only first year in the analysis track and Netsu's personal student. Power Loader introduced. It's been so long since Netsu has had an analysis student that he got a little too excited and insisted on designing your workspace himself. This used to be a testing room, there are a few others on either side of you, but this way you won't be distracted by the noise of the lab or worried about lab accidents damaging your computers. Power Loader shot a pointed look at May, who ignored him in favor of grabbing Izuku's arm and jumping up and down. This is awesome, Izuku-kun. Just imagine everything you'll be able to do with all these hacking babies. Izuku nodded, then remembered his manners and bowed to Power Loader. Thank you. I'll do my best to put it to good use. Power Loader nodded and smiled as he left. Mei gave his arm a reassuring squeeze before running back out of the room to her own workspace, and Izuku noted with relief that he had a clear view of her desk from his windows. He didn't know why that was so reassuring, but it was probably because she was his only friend and he didn't want to feel alone again. The other students each looked at Izuku curiously before they too turned back to their own workspaces, and he hoped that they wouldn't find him quite as creepy as they had before, now that they had a wall separating them and knew that he was supposed to be analyzing everything. Izuku reverently sat down at the desk and started to familiarize himself with the computers. He had a feeling this was going to be a good year. The opening ceremonies were interesting, for lack of a better word. Izuku didn't see Katsuki anywhere, which was honestly a good thing, but it was still kind of worrying. While Izuku wouldn't put it beyond him to just skip the assembly and hang out behind the dumpsters or something, he didn't think Katsuki would pull something like that on the first day. Oh well, if he made a poor first impression, then that wasn't Izuku's problem. The general muttering of the students died down and Izuku turned to the stage to see Present Mike striding out onto the stage. Hey, everybody! How's everybody doing this morning? To Izuku's surprise, Present Mike's enthusiasm was met with a general non-response. He didn't know why. This was Present Mike, the voice hero. He had his own radio show and everything. Midoriya? One of his classmates, the bald one, said softly, "Are you aware that you're mumbling again?" Izuku slammed his mouth shut and blushed. Sorry. I'll try to stop. Ugh, you're all idiots. The curly-haired girl leaned over Mei's lap and shoved a pencil in his face. Izuku took it hesitantly, not wanting to be rude. Thank you, but why? She rolled her eyes. Put it in your mouth. If you start talking, it'll fall out. Izuku's eyes widened. It was such a simple solution that Izuku didn't know why he hadn't ever thought of it before. Thank you so much. Whatever. She settled back into her seat and crossed her arms. Just use your chew toy so the rest of us can hear the DMN assembly. Izuku nodded frantically and bit down on the pencil as he turned back to the stage. Present Mike, having failed spectacularly at getting a response from the crowd, had apparently just decided to move on to the next order of business. Well, everybody, welcome to UA High, the premier hero school in Japan. To our upperclassmen, welcome back and good luck with your next year of studies. To our brand new first years, congratulations. Not just anybody can walk these halls, and it takes a lot of hard work and dedication to sit where you're sitting. That being said, don't go getting complacent, little listeners. You've each got your own stars that you're reaching for, and you're each gonna have to work extra hard, got it? So you're all gonna have to go beyond. Plus ultra. This time, at least, the students responded exactly how Present Mike wanted, earning a wide smile as he skipped back to the line of chairs across the stage where all the teachers and faculty were sitting, two of which were empty for some reason. Were there more teachers that weren't at the assembly? Or did they set up extra chairs for some other reason? The next part of the assembly consisted of the faculty all introducing themselves briefly, and Izuku dropped the pencil in his mouth twice as he instinctively started to ramble about each hero's quirk. He ended up taking out his own notebook and writing down his observations instead, adding subtle observations that he was only able to notice from up close. He was at UA. He'd be learning from pros. It was still so surreal. After each of the gathered teachers had gotten the chance to introduce themselves, Present Mike stood again. All right, listeners. Some of you may have noticed a couple empty chairs up here next to us awesome teachers. This is because there are two teachers you all haven't met yet. You upperclassmen know who one of them is, but for the first years, you might be lucky or unlucky enough to see our local cryptid in the halls. Aizawa Shoyuta, pro hero name Eraserhead, is off hazing his own first-year class, so wish them luck. They're gonna need it. Izuku's eyes widened. The underground hero. He couldn't beat All Might as Izuku's favorite hero, because All Might, but he was a close second. He fought practically quirkless and could take away other people's quirks at will. And he was a teacher here? What did Present Mike mean by hazing? Was that where Katsuki was? Izuku felt a brief surge of jealous anger. Katsuki got to learn from one of Izuku's favorite teachers? He wouldn't even appreciate the nuances of Eraserhead's fighting style. Unbidden, an image of Katsuki getting his explosions erased as he was tangled in Eraserhead's capture weapon came to his mind, and Izuku snickered quietly. Okay, so maybe Katsuki learning from one of his favorite heroes wouldn't be all bad. But that still leaves one more teacher that you listeners haven't met yet. Present Mike continued. He's a special new addition to our staff this year. You first-year hero students will be in for a real treat because here he is, the #1 hero, the symbol of peace, and the newest member of our staff, All Might. Izuku's jaw dropped, and he knew he wasn't the only one as a booming laugh echoed around the auditorium and the #1 hero himself strode out from behind the curtain. I am here to help mold the next generation of heroes. The auditorium exploded in applause and Izuku added to it wholeheartedly. He was going to be in the same building as All Might. This must be why he was in town. But how was he going to teach classes if he only had 3 hours in his hero form? Did he still have 3 hours? Or had saving Kakin from the sludge villain cut down on that time? What were the repercussions of him going over his limit? There was a clatter as the pencil dropped to his lap. Again, and Izuku hurriedly put it back in his mouth so he wouldn't mutter. Thankfully, no one could have heard him over the applause, but it would still be better to think about that when he was alone, that maybe he could come up with some way to counteract or even just minimize the effects of his injury, or maybe May could come up with some sort of illusion tech so he wouldn't have to use his hero time to teach. But that would involve telling her about All Might's other form, and he couldn't betray the hero's trust like that. Later. He could think about that later. For now, though, All Might had taken a seat in one of the empty chairs that was almost ridiculously too small for him, and Nedzu was climbing a small set of steps up the side of the podium. Hello, students. Am I a mouse? A dog? A bear? What's important is that I'm the principal. UA has a spectacular legacy and... Nedzu began to talk about the history of the school, and Izuku was on the edge of his seat as he listened for the first 10 minutes. May had lost interest after 3 and began to sketch out invention ideas again. Izuku really tried to pay attention. This man was going to be his teacher. He couldn't just tune him out. His classmates seemed just as bored as he was, and eventually Izuku decided that he could probably just apologize if he needed to and turned to fleshing out his analyses of the staff. Occasionally, May would poke his arm and point to a particular diagram, asking an unspoken question, and he would think for a moment before writing something beside her drawing. It went like that for another 15 minutes before Nedzu finally stopped talking. But I'm getting carried away. Nedzu clapped his paws together, waking up a few of the students that had fallen asleep during his speech. You all have bright futures ahead of you, and we are so excited to help you cultivate that light. So, as the principal of UA, congratulations and welcome to UA High School. There was a hesitant round of applause that got louder as Nedzu descended the steps, and the teachers all left the stage to go retrieve their classes. Within a few minutes, Power Loader was leading them back to the classroom. As they were walking back, the kid in their class with the shark quirk placed his hand on Izuku's shoulder and patted it consolingly. I'm sorry, Midoriya. I don't know how you're gonna survive being Nedzu's personal student if he's really that long-winded all the time. He wasn't that way during the entrance exam. Izuku tried. But maybe that was just because he didn't want to distract me as I was hacking UA. He ended up running into the girl walking from front of him as his classmates stopped walking in shock. You hacked UA during the entrance exam. What the F dash? I didn't get very far. Izuku defended, waving his hand in front of him nervously. I think they just wanted to see how I approached unsolvable problems, that's it. Yeah, May said, and I'm sure it didn't hurt that you'd already gotten a head start before the exam even started. Izuku turned to her in betrayal. May. Their classmates kept their distance from the two for the rest of the way back to the lab. When they got there, everyone sat down at their tables and Izuku went back to his room, noticing for the first time that there was a small school desk that had been placed outside the door, probably for when the class had a lecture instead of lab time. Before he could decide if he was supposed to go into his room or sit at the desk though, Power Loader cleared his throat to get their attention. We have about 20 minutes until class officially ends, he said. So, why don't each of you introduce yourselves? I know that the support course has a lot more individual work than the business course or the hero course, but it will still be helpful to get to know your classmates. Who wants to go first? The kid with the shark quirk shrugged and stood up. What do you want to know? Just say your name and quirk, dumbass. The curly-haired girl griped. Izuku felt his stomach sink. Yeah, he knew it was coming, but it still would have been nice if he didn't have to reveal his quirklessness right off the bat. Oh well, they already thought he was creepy, now there'd just be pity mixed in. Also include why you chose support. Power Loader added. It'll be helpful to know each other's motivations. All right. The kid with the shark quirk shrugged again. I'm Ryu Hanzo. My quirk's Great White, and I want to make waterproof tech. My quirk lets me do anything a shark can do, which means I can breathe underwater, so I spent a lot of time swimming as a kid, and would have totally spent weeks at a time in the ocean, but my phone and video games wouldn't work, so I'm gonna fix that. Izuku had never realized that would be an inconvenience to people with amphibious quirks, but he supposed that it made sense. Most technology was made to be used by people in air, and even most waterproof technology had a limit of either time or depth. Hanzo would definitely have a niche as an inventor if he could figure out how to move past those limitations. The class's eyes turned to the bald kid with pointed ears, who was sitting next to Hanzo. Oh, I'm next? Okay, my name is Shin Shiguro and my quirk is called Goblin. I, instinctively know the location of any non-living object I've ever touched. The accuracy goes down with time though, so if I haven't touched something for 10 years, I'd be able to tell you the city it's in, but not any more specific than that. I, just like building things. He sat down almost before he'd finished speaking and the class turned to the next student, which was the girl with curly hair. I'm Akane Kahaku and this mess, the girl gestured to her curls, which rattled slightly as they caught the light, is my quirk. It's called copper wire and it's a total pain to cut. Yes, it conducts electricity, yes, I use it in my inventions, no you can't touch it. Got it? The introductions continued like that for the rest of the class until it got to May. Hi. May Hatsum, future CEO of Hatsum Industries. My quirk is Zoom and it lets me see up to 5 kilometers away. My babies are gonna change the world. Izuku chucked quietly as he noticed their classmates instinctively lean back from May's enthusiasm. He was finally getting used to it himself, but it was still funny to see how other people reacted to her. Izuku noticed that the class was looking at him and he froze as he realized he was next. In fact, he was the last student to introduce himself. Hesitantly, he stood up. I'm Izuku Midoriya. I like analyzing heroes and quirks, so I want to be a support analyst and help heroes work smarter and be better. Izuku glanced at the clock. Class should be ending any second now. He could do this. Just bite the bullet. And I'm quirkless. The bell rang. Izuku grabbed his bag and bolted as soon as he heard the bell. A small part of him knew that his classmates might not reject him right off the bat. This was UA after all, but the larger part of him knew that wasn't very likely. These kids were still human, which meant that they would still see him as weak and defenseless now that they knew he didn't have a quirk, just like Katsuki had. He hadn't even noticed Mei chasing after him until she grabbed him by his arm and spun him around to face her. Izuku Hacker Midoriya, just what do you think you're doing? Breaking out the middle name? This must be serious. Izuku chuckled nervously. You do realize I might have a real middle name, right? It's too late to change it now, Izuku-in, your middle name is Hacker. Mei dismissed. Now, why'd you run away like that? Why do you think? Izuku couldn't help snapping, but then forced himself to take a deep breath. He wasn't used to letting himself feel frustrated about things like this, but that still wasn't any reason to take things out on Mei. I'm sorry, Mei-chan, but believe me, it's better if I can just avoid everything that was about to happen. People don't tend to react kindly when they learn I'm quirkless. You have to give people a chance to be good, Izuku-in. Mei stomped her foot. You can't just run away because you assume people are going to hate you. What if I hadn't forced you to listen after you told me? Would you have run away then too? Yes. Izuku was only able to hold himself back from yelling because he remembered they were still in the hallway. Look, you're the exception. All my life, the second anyone has learned that I was less evolved, they've turned on me. Everyone. Even my own mother started seeing me differently. I'm tired, Mei-chan. I don't think. I just didn't think I wanted to deal with that today. Okay? Mei looked as shocked as Izuku felt at his outburst. He hadn't really realized that all that was bubbling under the surface when he ran away from his classmates. He just thought he was not scared? He didn't know, but now that he was thinking about it, he realized that his frustrated self was probably more honest than he was used to being with himself. He was tired. Sick and tired of the constant betrayal that came with people abandoning him. He didn't want to do it anymore. Izuku. Mei's expression shifted from something almost like pity to a determined glare, and he had to take a step back as she grabbed his arm and started dragging him back toward the classroom. No. I'm not gonna let my best friend run away from potential allies just because he's scared of a little rejection. Any good inventor knows that you can't let a few explosions drive you from the lab. I'm not an inventor. Izuku dug his heels in and tried to yank his arm back, but Mei had years' worth of muscle from hauling around tools and materials, so all he did was slow her down. I'm an analyst. I use past data to make predictions. And all my data is pointing to this not being a good idea. Your data set is skewed. Mei countered. Now get back there and make friends. No. They were so busy with their modified game of tug-of-war that neither of them noticed Nedzu hanging upside down from the ceiling until they were right in front of him. Hello. Izuku yelped and Mei stumbled backward. Without her actively pulling against him, Izuku's own momentum was too much and he fell to the floor, pulling Mei down on top of him. His face grew hot as he realized that not only had the principal of UA, and supposedly his new personal mentor, caught him in the middle of a childish fight, but then Izuku had to make things worse by literally tripping over his own feet. Couldn't he catch a break? Oh dear. Nedzu smiled pleasantly. Well, this seems to be quite the predicament. Mei didn't waste any time untangling herself from Izuku, who groaned as she accidentally slapped him in her haste to get to her feet. Well, it was probably accidental, but really, who knew when it came to her? Either way, within seconds she had scrambled to her feet and started shaking Nedzu's paw enthusiastically. I'm Mei Hatsum, future CEO of Hatsum Industries. She grinned. And your principal Nedzu. Izuku hid his face in his hands, silently screaming in embarrassment, but Nedzu didn't seem fazed by Mei's behavior at all as he simply chuckled. That I am. And I know who you are, Miss Hatsum. I saw your entry for the entrance exam and I must say that I am very excited to see what you'll do here at UA. Do you mind if I steal young Midoriya from you for a moment? I'll return him by tomorrow. Before Izuku could protest being referred to as an object, Mei grinned, of course. She grabbed his arm and yanked him roughly to his feet. Nedzu was no help and simply grinned knowingly as Izuku was manhandled by his best friend. Mei shoved him forward, effectively handing him off to the principal. See if you can get him to stop being an idiot while you're at it. Nedzu laughed. I will do my best, Miss Hatsum. You'll have your work cut out for you. He's too stubborn for his own good. She turned on her heel and waved as she started walking away. Good luck, Izuku-kun. See you tomorrow. Izuku gulped and turned back to the principal. Hi. Nedzu simply smiled, seemingly unbothered by his awkwardness as he started leading Izuku down the hall. Hello. How was your first day? Did everything go well? Izuku nodded, pushing the whole situation with his quirk introduction out of his mind. It was really good. I heard that you had a hand in setting up my workstation, so thank you. Oh. Nedzu's smile grew a little more excited. Was everything to your liking? The moment I saw your request form, I thought, this simply won't do at all. You can't learn without the right materials, after all. It just seems like a little much. Izuku said softly. You really didn't need to go to so much trouble for me, I'm sorry. Nedzu waved his paw dismissively. Not at all. In fact, it was rather fun, so you were doing me a favor. Izuku hadn't thought of it that way, but he supposed that Power Loader had said that Nedzu had enjoyed setting up his little room. Oh, then you're welcome, I guess. They had arrived at a door that Izuku recognized from his entrance exam as the principal's office. Nedzu opened the door and gestured for Izuku to go in. Tea? Weiss, please. Nedzu grabbed a kettle from the side table and poured hot water into 2 cups, putting the tea bags in before setting them on the desk and inviting Izuku to sit down. Now, I'm sure you're eager to get home, and you're most likely wondering what this is all about, correct? Izuku nodded hesitantly, just a little, though I'm pretty sure you wanted to talk about my analysis lessons, right? Power Loader said something about me being your personal student, so… That is partially correct. Nedzu took a sip of tea. I do want to talk to you about that. However, there is something else. Power Loader mentioned that the support students work on projects over the course of the semester, correct? He said something about that in my acceptance letter. Izuku confirmed. But he hasn't said anything else about it. Ah, well Midoriya, each first-year support student chooses a project to work on every semester and most of your grade is based on your adequate completion of it. Most students in your class will be working on an invention, but I have something a little different in mind for you if you find it agreeable. Izuku nodded and took a sip of his tea as he waited for Nedzu to continue. Was he supposed to say something? But he didn't want to interrupt the principal of UA. Thankfully, Nedzu took his nod as answer enough and continued talking before Izuku could work himself into a full anxiety attack wondering how he was supposed to act around such a smart and important person. Well, not person but authority figure? Izuku hadn't really had many positive experiences with those. I would like you to make a full analysis of the first-year hero students' quirks. Nedzu said. They are still young and lack training, so they have a lot of room for improvement. You should focus your analysis on how they can play to their strengths while hopefully minimizing their weaknesses. These will be given to the students for them to use, so you'll be able to see the difference your skills can really make. Is that acceptable? Yes. Izuku sunk back in his chair sheepishly. Yes, that sounds like it will be a good project. It's not bad to be excited. Nedzu chuckled, making Izuku blush. In fact, that enthusiasm is probably a large part of why your analysis is so advanced at such a young age. I wouldn't have chosen this project if I didn't believe that you would enjoy it. Thank you. Izuku wrung his hands together anxiously, but, I don't think my analysis is really that advanced yet. I still have a long way to go. But of course. Nedzu smiled. This is a school after all. But that brings me to the next part of our chat. You do realize, of course, that as an analyst, you will often have access to sensitive information, whether this is given to you so that you can do your job or whether it is something like a hero's weaknesses that you've figured out yourself, correct? Izuku nodded, wondering where he was going with this. Well, I was planning on giving you full access to the school's camera system so you can easily observe the first years wherever they happen to be. Nedzu said. But, if you are observing correctly, you might become privy to certain circumstances when it comes to one of our faculty. This information cannot be allowed to get out, you understand. Izuku nodded anxiously. Was he really being entrusted with big secrets on his first day? What if he somehow messed it up? What if he accidentally posted something that exposed the secret and then the staff would hate him and he'd get kicked out of UA and blacklisted from all the other schools and… A knock on the door startled Izuku out of his spiraling thought. Nedzu jumped down from his chair to open the door, and here he is now. Welcome All Might. Come inside. Izuku practically deflated in relief as he saw All Might in his skinny form hesitantly walk in the door. Oh, you were just talking about All Might's other form. I already knew about that, so you don't have anything to worry about. Nedzu grinned manically and All Might did a double take and spit up a few drops of blood as he saw Izuku sitting at the desk. Nedzu, that's a student. Yes, that's Izuku Midoriya, my personal student. Nedzu said almost proudly, if that was even possible. I thought it would be best to tell him about your injury before he saw you change forms on the cameras, but it seems I had nothing to worry about. But All Might opened and closed his mouth nervously a few times. How? You, Izuku's stomach dropped slightly. You don't remember me? All Might looked between Izuku and Nedzu, confused, and a wave of disappointment washed over him. Didn't know why he expected All Might to remember him, but for some reason he'd assumed he would. That short conversation had completely derailed his life and knocked him forcefully onto a new path. So it just seemed so important to Izuku, but to All Might, it was just another conversation with a fan. Of course he didn't remember every fan he'd talked to. Remembering one person would be completely unreasonable. Izuku forced a smile onto his face, burying his disappointment in logic. It was almost a year ago, so it's okay that you don't remember. I asked you if I could be a hero and you encouraged me to choose a more realistic path. He chuckled awkwardly. I did. I still want to help people, but decided it would be safer if I did that from behind a computer, you know? Oh, All Might still looked confused, but after a moment, there was a flash of recognition. You were that quirkless boy. Izuku smiled and shrugged. I'm going to be an analyst. If you'd never saved my life that day and taken the time to talk to me, I would probably still be chasing an impossible dream. I'm a lot happier now though, so, thank you. All Might shuffled awkwardly, glancing to Nedzu, who was watching the scene with an unreadable expression. I'm, glad I could help. Izuku nodded and turned back to Nedzu. Well, I've known for a while now and haven't told anyone yet, so was that all you wanted to talk to me about? For now. Nedzu confirmed. Anything else can wait. Now, shouldn't you be getting home? Yes. Izuku bowed to them and grabbed his backpack before running to the door. Thanks. All Might hesitantly started edging for the door as well. I, should probably be heading out as well? Izuku was already on his way out, but he could have sworn there was a slight chill in Nedzu's voice as he closed the door. Actually, All Might, why don't you stay for a cup of tea? I believe we need to have a little chat. Izuku intentionally left later than he should have for school so that he wouldn't have to deal with his classmates, which was worth the risk of running into Katsuki on the train. He honestly wasn't planning on being as late as he was, but when he reached the station, he caught sight of Katsuki already waiting for the train. Luckily, he was facing the other way so he hadn't seen Izuku yet and he was able to hide around the corner until the train left. It meant that Izuku had to wait for the next train, but he wouldn't have to deal with an angry Katsuki, so it was all good. As it was, Izuku ended up sliding into the little desk outside his workroom right as the bell rang. Mei was sending him the stink eye, but he resolutely ignored her as Power Loader walked to the front of the room. He knew she was just trying to do what she thought was best for him, but she'd never had to deal with being quirkless before. All right, class, settle down. Power Loader said. Welcome to the support course. Today, you're going to be deciding on and starting your semester projects. These have to be approved by me, and I'll also be looking over them as you work to evaluate your progress and help you improve. I would personally recommend choosing a project that you would be able to use in the sports festival, since you're allowed to bring any support items you want, as long as you made them yourself. It's still a ways away, but it can sneak up on you if you're not careful. Izuku thought back to the project that the principal had given him. It wasn't an invention, but knowing all the first-year hero students' quirks would give him an edge that nobody else would have, so maybe that was why Nedzu assigned him to analyze their quirks. He should try to give each of the students a few suggestions before the sports festival as well, to help them do well. He glanced over at Mei, who was already messing with the materials on her desk in excitement. Choosing just one project would be difficult for her. Power Loader called his attention back to the front of the room. You are also allowed to work on other projects for extra credit, if you want. These have to be approved by me just the same as if they were official projects, they just don't have to go as in-depth. I will be right up here if you have any questions or want to get your project approved, so don't hesitate to ask. With that, he sat back down and left them to their work. Izuku immediately bolted into his room so Mei couldn't try to force him to make friends and closed the door behind him with a sigh. Immediately, his attention was grabbed by a nondescript post-it note stuck to the central screen of his computer. Izuku approached it hesitantly, fully expecting some hatred-filled death threat. It wouldn't be the first time, though his desk this morning had been notably clear of graffiti, which was a pleasant surprise. Though maybe Mei had just scared them out of doing something that obvious. Izuku hadn't ever had someone who was willing to protect him like that before. Izuku didn't even notice himself clenching his eyes shut as he snatched the note off the screen and had to force himself to take a peek, only for his eyes to widen in shock and relief as he realized that the note was actually from Nedzu, not his classmates. Midoriya, here's the password to the camera systems. RA+_0 Verlord. Burn this note. Winky face. Izuku read it twice until he was sure that he would be able to remember the password before looking around. Did his room have matches? He checked all the drawers and found every office supply he never knew he needed, but nothing that would allow him to burn the note as instructed. He couldn't just tear it up. Someone could potentially reassemble it and gain access to the cameras, and it would all be Izuku's fault, and then... His spiral stopped when he happened to glance out his window and notice May hard at work. She made so many things explode that she had to have something capable of burning a tiny piece of paper, right? But if he asked for her help, she might force him to confront their classmates, unless, of course, she was so distracted with her inventing that she completely forgot about her self-declared side quest. Izuku bit his lip and watched her for another long moment before deciding that it was a safe enough bet. The noise hit him immediately as soon as he opened the door. Almost everyone was working on something, and the happy sounds of drills and power tools seemed to come from every direction as he walked toward May's table. "Mei-chan, Nedza gave me this note and asked me to burn it. Do you have something that'd be able to take care of it?" May whipped her head around to face him, and he leaned back as the crosshairs in her eyes narrowed before she gave him a manic grin. "A note-burning baby? I can make one." She reached for the note, but Izuku held it out of her reach. "Actually, and I was hoping for something a little faster." May pouted. "You're no fun, Izuku-an." "Nope." Izuku agreed. "Now, are you gonna help me or not?" May glared at him for another moment before sighing and turning on her blowtorch. Izuku smiled brightly at her as he lit the corner of the note on fire and let it burn for a few seconds before dropping it onto the floor and stomping out the flames once the note had completely turned to ash. Their classmates seemed to be giving them a wide berth as they watched the exchange, but that was just fine by him. "Thanks, Mei-chan. Good luck on your project." Izuku started to walk back to his room, but was stopped in his tracks by May grabbing his arm. "Oh no, you don't." May's grip tightened slightly as she grinned savagely. "Izuku hacker Midoriya, you are going to talk to your classmates if it kills you." Izuku was honestly convinced that it might. "You're my friend, May. Shouldn't you be trying to keep me alive?" "Oh, shut up, you're not gonna die." May waved the hand that wasn't holding Izuku hostage dismissively. "Now, everybody listen up. This idiot think that you're all gonna hate him just because he was born with an extra toe joint or whatever, so he needs you to beat it through his thick skull that not everybody is like his old stupid bullies." Izuku hid his face in his hands and groaned as it turned red. It wasn't a safe bet. Well, at least he'd successfully burned the note and he could deal with all of his classmates' rejections at once. Small mercies, right? He prepared himself for the worst when he heard Kahaku scoff. "You're even kidding, right?" Izuku uncovered his face to find her looking extremely unimpressed. "If we're gonna hate you, it'll be because of something you did, loser." Izuku blinked a few times and flinched as someone patted his shoulder heavily. He looked up to see Hanzo grinning at him, something that was really intimidating considering his 3 rows of sharp teeth. "Yeah, dude, rejecting someone based on a quirk is totally uncool." Izuku's eyes widened and he glanced over the rest of the class, looking for any sign that they disagreed with what the other two had said. Most of his classmates just looked like they didn't care either way, which hadn't ever happened before, and the only one who didn't look bored with the whole thing was Shiguro, who was currently trembling. That being quirkless doesn't make you any less terrifying, Midoriya." May gave a shocked laugh and Izuku's jaw dropped. What? I'm not that scary, am I?" Kahaku rolled her eyes. "Yeah, and my hair's not a pain to brush. You caught the attention of Principal Nedzu, Midoriya. Of course you're scary." Power Loader cleared his throat and the class all turned to him. "Midoriya, UA has a zero-tolerance policy toward bullying and discrimination. You shouldn't have to worry about that, and if anyone gives you a hard time because of your quirk, you are more than welcome to report that to me or to Nedzu." "And I won't get in trouble?" Izuku asked, now reeling from shock. This all seemed like a dream. A good dream, but still a dream. He clamped his mouth shut when he noticed the heavy silence that had blanketed the room in a stark contrast to the happy sounds of working that had greeted him when he'd first left his room. His classmates were staring at him with various expressions of disbelief, shock, and even anger. "You used to get in trouble for reporting discrimination?" Kahaku asked. What the F dash? Well, it's just that every school has a zero bullying policy, Izuku hurried to explain, but most teachers tend to think that it's not a big deal. Or not big enough to get a promising student in trouble for, but then something has to be done about the complaint and someone has to be punished, so yeah. You don't have to worry about that anymore. Power Loader said firmly. We actually follow our policies here. We couldn't call ourselves heroes if we didn't even protect our students from each other. Thank you so much, goodbye. Izuku held hurriedly and rushed back into his room and slammed the door, wiping at his eyes furiously the moment he was out of sight. They really wouldn't let him get bullied? It just seemed so surreal. He couldn't resist the urge to pinch his arm to make sure that he hadn't just overslept somehow, but even though he pinched his arm hard enough to make the skin turn red, he was still at UA, staring at his private room with a setup of computers that the principal had personally set up. This was really real. After a minute or so, Izuku took a deep breath to steady himself and sat down at his computer. If UA was going to do so much to help him, the least he could do was become an analyst they could be proud of, starting with his assignment from Nedzu. Analyzing the Hero Course First Years. Once Izuku gained access to the system, he spent some time familiarizing himself with the system, making sure he knew how to pan between the different cameras and could figure out which cameras covered which areas of campus. Once he was comfortable with that, he grabbed an empty notebook from the shelf and started debating the best way to start his project. The only problem was that the first years hadn't really done anything yet. Yesterday had just been the entrance ceremony and Eraserhead hazing his class, whatever that meant, but they wouldn't start combat exercises until that afternoon at the very least, so what was he supposed to do until then? Izuku thought for a moment before looking through the archives to see if he could find the entrance exam. Whatever it had consisted of, it was apparently a good enough demonstration of each student's quirk and compatibility to determine their qualification for the hero course, so if it was good enough for UA, it should be good enough for him. It was somewhere to start, at least. Thankfully, Izuku found the footage he needed quickly, along with a list of the examinees by area. On instinct, he scanned until he found Katsuki's name. Testing Area C. Izuku bit his lip. He didn't actually need to see Katsuki's exam. He knew his quirk well enough from a lifetime of experience to be able to analyze it in his sleep, but a part of him needed to know if Katsuki really was as strong as he'd always bragged. Before he could second-guess himself, Izuku opened the footage from Katsuki's area. The minute that people started moving, Katsuki blasted ahead of the other examinees and went to town, leaving a trail of robot parts in his wake. Izuku felt a surge of anger. Couldn't he at least leave some of the robots for other people? No, that would require him thinking about other people for once in his life, wouldn't it? As he watched Katsuki destroy robot after robot, Izuku couldn't help but feel grateful that he hadn't tried for the hero course. As much as he hated to admit it, he really wouldn't have stood a chance against robots like that. They weren't the kind of opponents that he would have been able to beat simply by analyzing them. He wouldn't have gotten a single point. Katsuki, however, didn't even blink as he destroyed robots left and right. The main issue that Izuku could see was his recklessness. True to form, Katsuki treated the other examinees like extras that weren't even there, resulting in several instances where someone could have been injured from either his explosions or the shrapnel and debris that went flying with the destruction of each robot. Izuku watched as Katsuki let loose a giant explosion less than a foot from another examinee's face, effectively stealing the three-pointer that he'd been about to destroy. The other examinees that he'd done something like that to had shrugged it off and found another robot far away from Katsuki's attack radius. This one, however, some kid with purple hair that seemed to defy gravity, got angry. Izuku grimaced, knowing what was about to happen as the kid yelled at Katsuki, who wasn't going to let an insult like that stand. To his surprise, however, Katsuki turned around and walked away, allowing the purple-haired kid to finish off the three-pointer that had been injured by Katsuki's attack. That couldn't be right. Katsuki would never have backed down like that even if All Might himself had been yelling at him, much less some extra that he didn't even know. So what had that kid said to get him to just drop it? Is there audio on these cameras? Izuku muttered to himself, looking at the files more closely. Even if there was, the noise from the fight would probably have drowned out the conversation, but Izuku had to try anyway. He had to know what that kid said. As it turned out, the cameras did have audio, but when Izuku listened to the camera he'd been watching, all he could hear was metallic clanging and explosions as the students raced to destroy the robots. He almost gave up, but then he realized that for an exam like this, Nezu probably would have gone through extra trouble to make sure that there weren't any blind spots. That meant that there might actually be a camera closer to where the two were fighting, just pointed in the wrong direction so that it had a different field of vision. Within a few minutes, Izuku had found a camera that was almost directly above the fight he wanted to listen to. When he first opened the audio, he was worried that he still wouldn't be able to hear anything above the noise of the fight, but after a few seconds, he heard Katsuki's familiar voice. He could barely make it out above the din of combat, but Izuku could still understand what he was saying if he concentrated. He rewound the audio a few seconds until there was the sound of a loud explosion, most likely when Katsuki attacked the robot, and then a voice he didn't recognize started yelling. "You almost killed me. That must be the purple-haired kid. What do you think you're doing?" Katsuki's answer was more like a growl. "Get out of my way, extra. Forget about me and go find yourself another robot." Izuku waited to hear Katsuki's response, but it didn't come. Izuku looked at the time signature on the audio and did a double take when he realized that Katsuki had already stormed off to find another robot. He just told him to go away and he actually did? That didn't sound like Katsuki at all. Izuku face-bombed and laughed as he made the connection. He was an idiot, it must be the kid's quirk. There was no other way that Katsuki would have obeyed him. But what was his quirk? It would probably be in his file, assuming that Izuku had access to it. He navigated back to where the student files should be and entered his password, which actually worked. Information like the students' phone numbers and addresses were blocked out, but Izuku suspected that Nezu intended that as a mental exercise more than anything else. He didn't need any of that right now, though he needed quirks. He cross-referenced the list of examinees in Area C with the Hero Corps students, only to come up empty. Confused because someone who could get Katsuki to obey him was obviously extremely strong, Izuku widened his search to all first-year students. Hitoshi Shinso. Quirk, brainwashing. The three-pointer Izuku had seen him take out was about half his points, since his quirk wasn't naturally destructive, so he didn't have nearly enough points to get into the hero course, which Izuku honestly thought was a crime. Yeah, Shinso couldn't compete with kids like Katsuki when it came to destroying robots, but his quirk would be so useful for hostage situations and overpowered villains that couldn't be beaten head-on. And his quirk most likely had a lot of room to grow, since he could obviously modify memories with a simple command. Katsuki would have turned right around to explode him the minute Shinso released his hold if he hadn't been commanded to forget about him. And since he could do that, there was a chance that he could train to be able to give more complicated commands and maybe interrogations, even though his file said he couldn't give any commands that required higher brain function. Izuku grabbed the notebook he'd ended up scribbling his thoughts in, tearing out the first page that had the beginning of Katsuki's analysis on it, and headed out to the lab again. The other students were all busy at work again, though May did look up when she noticed him, probably expecting him to come over and talk to her. He could drop by her table on his way back, but that wasn't his goal right now. He gripped his notebook a little tighter as he approached Powerloader's desk. Izuku felt bad about interrupting whatever their teacher was working on, but Powerloader had said that he was here to answer any questions they had about projects and said he wouldn't get in trouble for reporting bullying, so he probably wouldn't get in trouble for interrupting him either. Wait, that maybe he was supposed to go through Nezu instead because he was an analysis student? Izuku-in. May's voice in his ear made his jump, and he looked over to see her grinning at him. What are you working on? Do you have a project you need approved? Are you gonna make super cool analysis babies? Well, it was too late to go back into his room because May had already caught Powerloader's attention and he was now looking right at them. Izuku took a deep breath and reminded himself that teachers were supposed to help their students, and Powerloader wasn't like his old teachers, so he wasn't going to get mad. Probably. You said we could do extra credit projects, right? Yep. Powerloader leaned forward attentively. Do you have one in mind? Izuku nodded and opened his notebook. Shinso Hitoshi. He's a Gen Ed student with a brainwashing quirk, but he originally applied to the hero course. I'd like to see if I can use my analysis to help him improve enough to get into the hero course at the sports festival. That's a pretty tall order. Powerloader said. Do you know how rare it is for someone from another course to actually succeed in transferring that way? The last one was Eraserhead when he was a student here. Izuku said confidently. But Shinso has what it takes. His quirk is powerful, it's just not any good against robots. Plus, this will be a good way to test if my analyses are useful. If I can help Shinso improve, then I'll know that my notes are actually helpful. Powerloader thought for a minute. As long as you won't get too discouraged if he doesn't end up transferring, then I don't see any problem with it. Ooh, Izuku-in, you said he's got a brainwashing quirk. Mei grinned manically. I could make so many babies for him. Powerloader. If I make some babies, could he use them in the sports festival? He's a Gen Ed student? Powerloader asked. He should be able to bring a single support item, but it'll need to be approved by Nedzu in advance. Good enough for me. We're adopting him. Mei declared. Powerloader just sighed. Adopting him? Yep. Mei smiled. Izuku-in and I are adopting him as our extra credit project. Let me read your notes. Mei grabbed his notebook and started reading while Powerloader looked at Izuku, who smiled and shrugged. Hey, at least she didn't try to call Shinso one of her babies. Mei hummed and turned a page. Where did you even find extra credit, Kuin? Anyway, Izuku-in? Izuku couldn't hold back a grin as he started walking back toward his room. He yelled at my ex-bully during the entrance exam. Mei cackled. Izuku frowned in frustration as he turned off his computer and gathered his things in preparation to go to their core classes. He'd spent most of the afternoon watching Class 1A through the cameras as they did some sort of indoor combat exercise that All Might had put together, and it was frustrating. Don't get him wrong, it was amazing to see all of the students' amazing quirks in action. It was just so frustrating to see them acting so far beneath their potential. Like that kid with the electricity quirk who fried his brain within seconds of the exercise starting, or the kid with the hot and cold quirk who didn't even use his heated side until the exercise was already over. They could do so much more. They could save so many people, if they could just think a little more creatively. And then there was Katsuki. He had everything. He had an amazing quirk, good battle sense, and even some of the techniques Izuku had suggested before Katsuki had started bullying him. He really did have the potential to be an amazing hero, maybe even the best, if he wasn't so violent. He hardly noticed Mei start rambling to him as soon as he sat down in the desk outside his workroom to wait for the teacher to arrive until she slammed her hands down and leaned down until she was nose to nose with him. Okay, what's up? Izuku leaned back slightly and stuttered, W. Mei rolled her eyes and leaned forward even more so that Izuku was forced to lean all the way back in his seat until his head was touching the wall behind him. You're dragging your feet. Didn't you get to watch the hero course fight today? Wasn't even expecting to be able to get a word in edgewise, but here you are giving one-word answers. Oh. Izuku shrugged. It's just that I was observing my bully's class today. Instantly, Mei looked murderous. I can't believe they let that a-hole in after what he did to you. And didn't he try to attack extra credit Kuin during the exam? I should go straight to Nedzu and tell him that he needs to expel that JRK immediately. Izuku interrupted her with a sigh. You can't do that, Mei. First of all, my teachers purposely never reported the bullying so there wouldn't be red flags when he applied to UA. Second of all, he didn't attack Shinso. Even if he had actually hurt him, it would have just been as collateral damage, or in retribution for yelling at him. Last of all, he probably shouldn't be expelled. And why not? Mei's yell caught the attention of the rest of the class. He's a bully, Izuku-in. He made you miserable for years, he shouldn't be a hero. Wait, what are we talking about? Kahaku interrupted, pulling off the scarf she used to cover her hair while inventing, what's this about a bully being a hero? Nothing. Izuku said quickly. Mei shot him a glare before turning to the rest of the class. The traitor, Izuku-in's old bully, somehow got into the hero course. He was part of the class Izuku observed today. What? Hanzo bared his teeth, his normal wide smile becoming sharp and intimidating. What's his name? I just want to talk. Everybody stop. Izuku said sternly. Nobody is going to do anything. Nobody's going to try to fight him and nobody's going to Nedzu. Understood? Mei didn't drop her glare, but... No, Izuku held her gaze. So what did he do today that put you in such a funk? Kahaku asked. Like, I was expecting to have to tell you to shut up at least 3 times. See? Mei gestured broadly to her. I'm not the only one who noticed. Izuku shot her a look. It's nothing. Yeah, no, dude. Hanzo said with a small smile. We're not buying that. Izuku looked around the room, hoping for someone to be on his side, but even Shiguro shrugged. If it was really nothing, you probably wouldn't be so insistent? Izuku sighed. He should have expected that his classmates would be at least as curious as he was, especially after meeting Mei. This was what he got for joining the support course. It was just annoying. There was an odd number of students, something about a student leaving because of Eraserhead's hazing yesterday, so he was put by himself against 2 other students, one with a speed quirk and the other with gravity negation. Heh, Kahaku chuckled. Shouldn't that be a good thing? I bet he got his butt handed to him, didn't he? Izuku shook his head. He put them both in the infirmary. Like, I know that violence is an inherent part of the hero industry. You can't defeat villains without hurting them. But none of the other students were injured badly enough to have to get medical attention. One of the signs of an amazing hero is actually how much they're able to avoid harm. He shook his head. I'm probably just being nitpicky because of our history. Probably. Hanzo agreed. But that still doesn't mean he should be in the hero course if he bullied you, dude. What's to stop him from going totally crazy and hurting someone who's not a villain? Shiguro nodded in agreement. I wouldn't want any of my old bullies to be heroes, either. Yeah. Mei crossed her arms in front of her chest. So I'm going to Nedzu and telling him to kick this guy out. That rat loves you enough to give you a whole room. I'm sure he'd be happy to expel him for you. Izuku wasn't so sure, but surprisingly he realized that it might not be outside of the realm of possibility. It was so surreal to have adults who actually cared, and if that was all there was to it, then Izuku might actually be tempted to go to Nedzu himself, seeing as he most likely wouldn't get punished for snitching, but the situation was a little more complicated than that. It's not that I want Katsuki to be a hero so much that I don't want him to be a villain. Does that make sense? He's a bully, Izuku-an. Mei protested. He's already a villain in my book. Izuku looked around and saw his classmates looking confused and still angry on his behalf, but didn't see any of the understanding he'd been expecting. He sighed. He has the potential to be a decent hero, and his violent tendencies will be directed toward villains, but if he get expelled, or worse, blacklisted, what'll he do? At least as a hero, his violent tendencies will be directed toward villains and people who deserve it, rather than any civilian who looks at him wrong. Still doesn't mean he deserves to be a hero. Mei grumbled. Izuku shrugged. Maybe not, but it isn't even a big deal. It's not like I'm going to see him a lot. We're in different departments and I'm going to start arriving early, so I won't even see him on my way to school. The only interaction I'll even have with him will be my analysis project that he won't even read anyway. So just drop it. His classmates didn't necessarily seem happy with his explanation, but at least they saw the logic in it. Izuku supposed that was about as good as he could hope for. Everyone here was extremely intelligent, they wouldn't have gotten in otherwise, but nerds often weren't treated the best. Add to that Hanzo's mutation quirk, Shiguro's shyness, and Mei being well, Mei and there was a good chance that every single one of his classmates had been bullied at some point in their lives. Of course they wouldn't be happy about letting a bully off the hook. There's gotta be a way to get some sort of revenge at least, right? Hanzo said after a long minute. I mean, we can't just let that dude get off scot-free. Mei's eyes lit up, so Izuku interrupted, that's really not necessary, guys. No, Kahaku grinned, but it'll be fun. Mei grinned in return. I like you. Come on. Izuku-an. Revenge. We're the support course. We'll have access to all his babies. Izuku rolled his eyes. As fun as that would be, he's still a hero student, and it's our responsibility as support students to support him, not sabotage him. Not to mention that faulty support gear could potentially endanger not only him, but also his classmates and eventually civilians, so revenge is out of the question. Kahaku thought for a long moment, what about just being a little petty? Izuku looked at her curiously, which she took as permission to continue. I mean, obviously we wouldn't do anything to put him in danger or anything, that would be stupid, but you know how annoying a tiny little rock can be when it's in your shoe? Mei's eyes lit up again. You're suggesting we do a bunch of tiny things to annoy him? Kahaku nodded, grinning. It's how I got rid of my bullies back in elementary school, before everyone learned not to mess with me. The big thing is plausible deniability. Don't do anything that you couldn't talk your way out of if the teachers ask. But we'll know, which will be really satisfying if he gets a shirt that's say half a size too small and the slightly wrong shade. Izuku thought about that for a minute. He had to admit that it might be fun, provided that no actual harm was being done, since he didn't want to become a bully in return or put Katsuki in any danger, and if he could stop at any time, I suppose it wouldn't be too bad to get a little payback. Yes. Mei pumped her fist and hugged him, causing him to turn bright red as the rest of the class laughed at him. Oh, we're gonna have so much fun. I'm gonna make so many little nuisance babies. Someone clearing their throat behind them made the class freeze and they turned around to see Midnight standing in the doorway, looking like she just arrived. You're not being naughty, are you? Izuku and Mei shared a panicked glance before he sat up straight and gave a bright smile. No, ma'am. Or at least, I wasn't, I'm already in my seat. Everyone else, however. The class rushed to find their seats as Midnight laughed at their reactions. Izuku smiled and took out a new notebook, simply labeling it nuisance. He'd known this year was going to be fun. Majima walked into the staff room after school and made a beeline for the couch, face planting onto it with a groan. Eraser, never let me give you a hard time about your problem children again. Aizawa snorted, but didn't even look up from the paper he was grading. Serves you right. You have problem children this year? Yamada grinned as he looked up from his own paperwork. That must be fun. What are they like? Majima lifted his head off the couch just enough to look him in the eye. You'll know soon enough. They've decided to use one of your students as an extra credit project. Netsu hid his smile behind his teacup, knowing full well exactly which students Majima was talking about. Of course, he hadn't had a chance to peek at the cameras for Class 1F just yet. He still had a school to run after all, but Midoriya and his friend Hatsum had so much chaotic potential that there was little chance that Majima was talking about anyone else. The only question now was which student had they chosen as their victim. I'm the homeroom teacher for 1C. Yamada said slowly. What would a couple of support corps students want with a gen ed kid? Majima sighed in exhaustion and sat up. They've decided that one of your kids is getting into the hero course, and that they're helping him do it. Can they even do that? Snipe asked. There's nothing in the rules against it. Netsu said cheerfully. It might have taken a few loopholes if they were teachers, but since they're all students, then they're simply helping their friend, correct? Of course you know exactly who I'm talking about. Majima muttered. You do know this is your fault, right? If it was just Hatsum, I could handle it. I've had plenty of students like her in the past, but whenever she's combined with your protege... Wait, you have a protege? Yamada yelled, making Aizawa finally look up from his papers to cancel his quirk, not that Yamada noticed or even cared. You never take personal students. What even is this kid? A hellspawn, probably. Aizawa said. He has to be if he caught the rat's attention. Netsu simply smiled and let his faculty form their own opinions. Many of them already knew about Midoriya and some had even met him, but the few who hadn't were all listening to the conversation with a mixture of curiosity and fear. All Might in particular looked vaguely terrified after the chat that Netsu had had with him the other day. Not that the scolding had been undeserved, of course, but it meant that he was probably a bit more primed to be scared of Midoriya's potential and of Netsu's interest in him. Netsu was honestly more disappointed that All Might had forgotten about Midoriya after accidentally showing him his weakness than he was about the whole telling him not to be a hero thing. Netsu was still a bit upset, since heroism had apparently been Midoriya's lifelong dream, but the fact was that he was quirkless. As sad and terrible as it was, Netsu couldn't pretend that Midoriya wouldn't be at a distinct natural disadvantage not just in combat, but in the flashy popularity contest that defined the industry. It probably didn't matter which hero he had asked, they probably would have given the same answer, so at least All Might had tried to be polite about it. Forgetting about the boy, however, was a much more serious offense. If Midoriya had secretly been a villain or had taken All Might's advice badly, it could have been disastrous for all of Japan. Even if All Might had been 100% certain that Midoriya would never use his weakness against him, the boy's knowledge of it would make him an appetizing target for the many villains that had a vendetta against the #1 hero. By not communicating the encounter to anyone, not even Tsukachi, All Might had put not only himself, but also an innocent civilian in danger, which was idiotic no matter what ranking he held. Nezu would have to keep an eye on him while he was at UA to make sure he didn't endanger a student like that again. Which brought Nezu to his next concern, which was the heroics exercise he had observed that afternoon. It had been decent, but All Might obviously hadn't known when it was appropriate to stop a match to prevent undue harm. Teaching students combat was tricky, since they obviously didn't yet know how much force was appropriate for certain situations. Some tended to use too little, so afraid of causing harm that they limited their own effectiveness, while others like young Bakugo tended to go overboard and use too much. It was a hard line to balance, especially for someone like All Might who was perfectly capable of punching away all of his problems, but it was one of the most important things that their students would learn over the course of their 3 years there, which meant that it was something that All Might would need to improve on sooner rather than later. Thankfully, the other teachers would be able to pick up the slack. Speaking of the other teachers, honestly, as much as I hate to admit a man is right, Kiyama drawled, I think Aizawa might be right about this one. It's the green-haired one, right, Nezu? Midoriya? Nezu nodded and gestured for her to continue as the rest of the teachers leaned forward slightly in anticipation and curiosity. When I showed up to teach today, the kid was leading his classmates in a revenge plot against the hero students. Kiyama liked her lips and smiled. It was delicious. Nezu didn't know whether to be proud, concerned, excited, or angry, so he settled on gathering more information before making that decision. Do you know which student? Kiyama shrugged, not quite sure. I do know he's a first year and apparently bullied the poor boy. I love their idea of revenge. The mischievous little imps are going to do a bunch of subtle things to make the kid miserable. So just look for which of the first years encounters more than his fair share of daily frustrations and you'll have your target. There were easier ways to find the child, if one just hacked into the right records. If all went well, as it undoubtedly would, Nezu would have this boy's name by the end of the night. And he was a bully, you said? Nezu, sir? All Might said hesitantly. Please tell me that you're going to stop this rather than joining in. All Might visibly gulped at the sharp smile Nezu gave him. Now, All Might, one of the goals of a teacher is to help one's students accomplish their goals. What kind of a teacher would I be if I didn't give Midoriya any assistance? But don't bother. Aizawa said. That kind of pettiness is right up Nezu's alley, so at least he's only going to be taking it out on one brat rather than the whole of humanity. The only thing he'll have to worry about is the conspiracy theorists trying to accuse the kid of being his secret love child or something. So, Yamada grinned. I get to meet the little listener? Which of my students has he adopted? I think Midoriya said his name is Shinso. Power Loader sighed. He has a brainwashing quirk. Good choice, I approve. Nezu chirped. He remembered Shinso from the exams, of course. It was a shame that he didn't get enough points, but despite his and Aizawa's best efforts, the school board had shot down every single one of the alternate exam ideas they had proposed, leaving Shinso in general education until he was able to prove himself during the sports festival. Brainwashing? Aizawa asked. It's an intriguing quirk, I can see why Midoriya was drawn to it. Nezu chirped. Young Shinso can control anyone provided that they answer one of his questions. And of course, it's useless against robots. Aizawa muttered and dragged a hand down his face. Please tell your protege not to only focus on the kid's quirk. With a drawback like that, he'll have to be able to fight without it. Oh, you don't have to worry about that. Nezu dismissed. I do believe that Midoriya would be the last person to limit a person based entirely on their quirk. Oh, Kiyama asked. And why is that? There was a moment of tense silence before All Might, to Nezu's surprise, answered, "Because he's quirkless." "That explains it," Aizawa said after a moment. "If he caught your attention, he obviously doesn't let it limit him. Now let's see if the other problem child sees it the same way." Izuku leaned back in his seat after finishing up the list of theories he'd been working on. He'd spent the morning reviewing the videos he had of the hero students and making rough lists of potential ideas for improvement that he could clean up once he'd seen their quirks in action more, but for now, there wasn't much else he could do on that project, which meant that it was time for extra credit Kuin. Oh god, Mei really was starting to rub off on him, wasn't she? Izuku shook his head with a chuckle as he grabbed the notebook he'd dedicated to their extra credit project and opened Shinso's file, only to realize that he was at a dead end there as well. At least with the hero students, he had some combat videos to analyze, but all Izuku had for Shinso was his student file and the video of his entrance exam, which obviously didn't show the full potential of his quirk because he couldn't use it on robots. If Izuku wanted his analysis to be of any use to Shinso at all, he needed more information. The easiest way to get that information would be to simply ask and hope that Shinso wouldn't be too creeped out to answer him. Well, even if he was creeped out, he'd probably still answer if Izuku explained that it was to help him do better in the sports festival. Anyway, it didn't really even matter because he was probably in class right now, but it wouldn't hurt to check, right? Before he could second-guess himself, Izuku opened up the class schedule for Class 1C. Even if Shinso was in class, which he should be, it would still be helpful to know his schedule so he and Mei could track him down later. Speaking of Mei, she chose that moment to burst through the door to Izuku's workroom without knocking. She didn't even wait for him to look up before she had draped herself over his shoulders, groaning dramatically, "Aizu-kun, help. I can't make Shinso's babies." Izuku snorted, "Most girls have to actually meet a guy before creating his children." Mei grabbed his shoulder and spun his chair around so he was facing her and could see the manic grin that had just spread across her face. "That's a brilliant idea." Izuku smiled and shook his head fondly. "Let me guess, you need more info on his quirk and fighting style before you can really get started?" "Yep." Mei picked an empty spot on Izuku's desk and sat down. "You too?" Izuku nodded and turned back to his screen. "I was just looking up his schedule to see when the best time to meet him would be." "Well, make it ASAP." Mei said impatiently. "I want to start making babies." "You can't just rush these things, Mei-chan, it isn't polite." Izuku told her patiently. "We can't just take him out of class. Or maybe we can." Mei jumped off the desk and leaned over her shoulder. "Wait, what is it?" "He has a study PRD right now." Izuku pointed to the screen. "If we got Powerloader's permission, we could probably pull him out of class for a few minutes, since he wouldn't actually be missing any lessons." "Let's do it." Mei hugged him tightly before pulling him to his feet and pushing him toward the door. "What are you waiting for?" "I have babies to make." Their classmates glanced up at Mei's declaration as the door opened, but they spared the two less than a second before shaking their heads and going back to work on their own projects. Izuku still thought it was a little weird how quickly the class had seemed to just accept their antics, but he wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. He had Mei and that was enough for him right now. He'd probably just manage to work himself into an anxiety attack if he tried to second-guess every interaction he'd had with his classmates looking for ways that they actually hated him, and honestly, he was too busy with his analysis projects to have any time for that right now. It didn't take them long at all to reach Powerloader's desk, especially not with Mei still pushing him in her excitement. Powerloader simply sighed and looked at them as they approached. "Should I be concerned about what you two are cooking up?" "No." Izuku said at the same time that Mei shouted, "Yes." Unfortunately, Mei's voice was just a little louder. "We just want to ask Shinso some questions about his quirk," Izuku said quickly. "I looked and he has a study PRD right now, so we were hoping we could borrow him and bring him here. We'd use my workroom so we wouldn't bother the other students. Please?" Izuku had learned his puppy dog eyes from his mom, and honestly, he wasn't even aware that he was doing them until he caught Mei mimicking his expression out of the corner of his eye. Powerloader simply looked at them tiredly for a long moment before caving. "Midoriya, you go and get him. I'm not sure I trust Mei not to blow something up between here and there." Come on, it's not like there are that many explosive things between here and the general education department. May exclaimed. Just the wiring. And probably the fire extinguishers if you count foam as an explosion. Oh. And the security system. Izuku-kun, do you know if there are any bombs in the security system? Yeah, it's probably for the best if I just go, Izuku said, ignoring the way May pouted at him as he turned back to Power Loader. Could I have a note explaining the situation in case Shinso's teacher asks why I need him? Present Mike should already be expecting you. Power Loader said tiredly. I mentioned your little project to the other teachers and warned him that it was only a matter of time before you dropped by. Oh. Izuku didn't know if it was good or bad that the entire faculty knew about their plans to help Shinso. Honestly, he'd never had teachers care about what he wanted to do before, so this was all new territory. That's good then. Power Loader nodded. Get back quick before Hatsum blows up our lab again. May cackled and ran back toward her desk. Good luck. Hitoshi tapped his pencil idly on his notebook as he reviewed English verb structure for the third time. Not that having a second language wouldn't be useful, but he couldn't help thinking that the hero students were probably training right now and getting more and more of an unfair advantage every minute that Hitoshi spent studying academics. There was only so long until the sports festival and his last chance to get into the hero course, so he didn't want to waste any time. The silence of the classroom was interrupted by a quiet knocking of the door, and a tiny-looking kid with tangled green curls and large eyes poked his head in. Present Mike, sir? Would it be all right if I borrowed Shinso for a few minutes? Hitoshi froze as his entire class swiveled in their seats to look at him curiously, as if he had any idea why a kid he'd never seen before in his life was interrupting his class asking for him by name. His classmates' curiosity was almost palpable as Mike-sensei looked up from his desk and gave the boy a mischievous smile. You're one of Power Loader's gremlins, right? The kid sputtered for a moment at Mick's wording before apparently giving up on being embarrassed and letting out a sigh as he walked fully into the room. Yes, sir. He said that he mentioned things to you. Of course. Mike grinned. Shinso, go ahead and grab your things. There's no guarantee you'll be back by the end of class. As Hitoshi hurried to comply, Mike turned back to the kid. Try to return him in one piece, you dig? Hitoshi's eyes widened and he felt himself pale slightly as the kid returned Mick's smile with a small one of his own. No guarantees. I'm not the one you need to worry about, but also I'm not responsible for anything Mei-chan does when she's excited. Oh. Mike laughed. I can see why Nedzu likes you so much. The class erupted into whispers and Hitoshi was starting to wonder if he would have a better chance of surviving if he just jumped out the window. Mike-sensei wouldn't actually let this mystery kid, or whoever this Mei-chan person was, hurt him, right? Hitoshi finished packing his backpack and gulped as the kid smiled at him. Normally, a bright smile like that would put him more at ease, but after hearing the kid basically plot his murder, it just looked vaguely terrifying. Reluctantly, Hitoshi followed his kidnapper? Was that what the kid was? What was even happening? His kidnapper didn't say anything as he led Hitoshi down the hallway to a part of the school he didn't recognize, not that that was helpful at all, considering that he'd been at UA for less than a week. He had no idea what was happening anymore and honestly, he was too afraid to ask. All he knew was that this kid might kill him and his teacher wouldn't even care. So much for the teachers at UA being different. His kidnapper still didn't break the silence, and as they got even more lost in the maze that was UA, Shinso eventually got fed up and decided that if he was going to get murdered anyway, it wouldn't hurt to at least ask this kid why he'd kidnapped him. At the worst, he'd just get killed a little sooner, right? Hitoshi's voice sounded too loud and he had to take a step back as the kid pinned him with those wide eyes, giving Hitoshi a strange sense that this kid knew everything about him and was simply dissecting him with his gaze. I have a few questions. The kid smiled brightly again. Of course. I might not be able to give the best answers, but I'll try. Okay, Hitoshi took a breath. Who are you? Where are we going? Why did you just kidnap me? Finally, who is Mei-chan and should I be writing my will? The kid looked at him in shock for a long moment before he started giggling uncontrollably. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I didn't and I completely forgot to introduce myself, so no wonder your then present Mike called me a gremlin, which probably didn't help anything. This is probably why our classmates are terrified of us, huh? Probably. Shinso said, not because he knew this kid's classmates, but more because he didn't really have any other response to that. So? Oh, right. The kid jumped slightly and started walking into the labyrinth that was UA again. My name is Izuku Midoriya and we're heading back to my classroom. Mei-chan is my best friend. She probably won't hurt you, she just gets really excited about her inventions and they don't always work the first time, which isn't that bad, you just need to be a little careful in case they explode unexpectedly. We're support students. Obviously, since Mei-chan has inventions to explode. What else? Oddly enough, Midoriya's rambling was actually calming and made him seem less like some mysterious psychopath, so Hitoshi actually found himself feeling a little more at ease as he pet an eyebrow. Why you kidnapped me? Midoriya furrowed his forehead as his voice dropped to a mutter. I didn't. Why would I? Well, I guess I did kind of steal you away unexpectedly, but that wasn't. Midoriya. Hitoshi interrupted the kid's mutter storm and gestured for him to continue. Why did you kidnap me? Oh, Midoriya chuckled awkwardly and rubbed the back of his neck. I don't want to get into too much detail without Mei-chan here, but basically, we're going to get you into the hero course. The what? Hitoshi's mind was still reeling by the time they arrived at a large door that obviously led into a support lab. What did Midoriya mean when he said they were going to help him get into the hero course? Could they even do that? How? He was knocked out of his stupor, quite literally, when the door blew off its hinges and threw him and Midoriya against the far wall of the hallway. It didn't hurt as bad as he would have expected, and honestly he was more dazed than hurt, but maybe that had something to do with the whole situation and not the fact that he'd just gotten thrown against a wall and was now sitting on the hallway floor. Mei-chan! Midoriya yelled. You could have hurt us. Don't worry, Izuku-kun, that was just a disorienting blast. A girl with bright pink hair and coveralls tied around her waist appeared in the doorway, nonchalantly moving a giant pair of goggles from her face to her head as if she hadn't just blown up half the hallway. They'll cause damage to things but not to people. Perfect for hostage situations. Oh! Midoriya scrambled to his feet and grabbed a notebook from his pocket. How does that affect people like Samantas who are, objectively, made from things? There's a kid in 1A who can turn into rock and another in 1B who can turn into steel. Would they be affected? Would it only damage them when their quirks are activated? Or is the damage caused because the thing is non-living, in which case quirks wouldn't affect it because the person with the quirk is still alive? What about? What the? A hero that Hitoshi assumed was Power Loader appeared in the doorway, his hands going to his helmet as he took in the scene. How? Hatsum, I literally looked away for 2 seconds. Well, technically an explosion takes only a fraction of a second to begin. Midoriya began. But the actual chemical reaction can take several seconds to run its course, depending on the chemicals involved, but you wouldn't be able to stop it once it reached the activation energy. Didn't you two promise to not bother the other students if I let you bring Shinso here? Power Loader. Oh, it's a support lab. Hatsum dismissed. Explosions are normal. We're not bothering. Shut the F up and go to your boyfriend's room already. A female voice called out loudly from inside the classroom. Midoriya turned bright red and sputtered, but Hatsum apparently didn't care about whatever her classmate was implying, because she simply zeroed in on Hitoshi and leaned down until she was only inches away from his face. He instinctively pressed himself as far against the wall as he could, which unfortunately wasn't very far. She smiled at him manically. You must be extra credit-kun. Izuku-kun's told me so much about you. We're gonna have so much fun. Hitoshi simply blinked at her as he waited for his brain to catch up and maybe, just maybe, make sense of her words. Extra credit-kun? Mei-chan. Midoriya shoved her away from him and shook his head as he helped Hitoshi up. You can't just call people by nicknames like that the first time you meet them. Shinso has a name. Not important. Hatsum dismissed. What's important is that I'm going to make his babies. Hitoshi choked on nothing and almost fell back onto the floor again as the crazy girl grabbed his hand and pulled him into the lab with Midoriya following close behind. He barely got a glimpse of the other students before he was being yanked into a small dark room lined with computers and the door shut ominously behind him, trapping him with the two crazy students who had just kidnapped him. Was being a hero really worth all this? Yes, it was. Hitoshi took a deep breath and looked at his kidnappers with a well-practiced bored expression. So, are you gonna explain what's going on now? Hatsum turned and slapped Midoriya's chest. Aizu-kun, why didn't you explain anything to Extra Credit-kun? I was waiting for you. Midoriya defended. I thought you wanted. Don't waste time on my account, Aizu-kun. We have work to do. Hatsum turned back to Hitoshi. You, Extra Credit-kun, are our new project. Hitoshi didn't think that explained anything except for the nickname he'd apparently acquired, but thankfully Midoriya was a little more willing to fill in the gaps. Power Loader has agreed to give us extra credit if we use our skills to help you. Midoriya sighed as he turned on the lights and sat down in front of the line of computers. I'm an analyst and Mei-chan is obviously an inventor, so we're going to be your support, I guess? I'll help you analyze and train your quirk and she'll make you a support item that you can use in the sports festival next month to give you the best possible chance of transferring into the hero course. Honestly, it's ridiculous that they wouldn't let you in the hero course in the first place, but at least now you can prove everyone wrong, right? Hitoshi thought about that for a long moment. So you're basically going to train me to be a hero so you can get extra credit? Midoriya smiled awkwardly. Yes? I mean only if that's okay. Don't have to if you don't want us to. I mean I get that we can kinda be a lot sometimes and… Don't give him a choice, Aizu-kun. Hatsum exclaimed. We're helping you and that's final. Okay, Extra Credit-kun. Hitoshi couldn't help snorting. Well, I'm not exactly in a position to say no, but are you sure you even want to help a kid with a villain's quirk become even more dangerous? What if I go rogue like everyone's always told me? His kidnappers obviously hadn't missed any of the bitterness in Hitoshi's voice, because they shared a glance and when Hatsum responded, she sounded angry. Okay, that's it. You're gonna win this and we're gonna prove those assholes wrong. I am so sick of people being rude to my friends just because of downright stupid prejudices. Friends? Hitoshi's brain went blank. Hatsum couldn't possibly be including him in that, could she? They'd literally just met. But then she'd already talked about having his babies. Whatever the hell that meant. It's best not to fight her friendship. Midoriya gave him a small, determined smile. When Mei-chan gets something in her brain, it's best to just roll with it. So, let's start with your quirk. It's brainwashing, right? Verbal response-based. Hitoshi nodded, still reeling. Yeah. But, I can't control higher brain functions, just basically make the person into a puppet. Midoriya had whipped out a notebook and was rapidly writing down everything Hitoshi was saying. How do they snap out of it? Do you have to release your control? Hitoshi shrugged. I can, like if they complete all the orders I gave them, but it's more common for someone else to jostle them, which can break my hold. That's how most of my classmates rescued anyone they thought I'd used my quirk on. Midoriya ignored Hatsum's annoyed buzzing next to him. Ask me a question. Why? Hitoshi asked suspiciously. Midoriya grinned. So you can brainwash me, of course. I need to know how it feels to be on the receiving end and it'll help me explore your limits. His eyes went blank as Hitoshi took control, glancing over at Hatsum, expecting her to be creeped out at the very least. To his surprise, however, she just looked excited and grabbed Midoriya's notebook from his lax grip, flipping through some of the pages until she'd found what she was looking for. Okay. Aizu-kun already made a list of orders he wants you to give him, so let's start. Tell him to stand on one foot. Hitoshi hesisted, glancing between Hatsum and Izuku. He'd learned the hard way not to give anyone any functional orders without their express permission. I should ask him first. Well then, just ask him now. Hatsum said impatiently. It'll be another experiment to see if he tells the truth under your quirk. It doesn't work like that. Hitoshi griped and turned to Midoriya. Tell me whether or not you're okay with me giving you orders. Just as he'd expected, Midoriya simply sat and stared at him blankly. Hitoshi turned back to Hatsum, who looked vaguely disappointed. See? Verbal responses count as a higher brain function. I'm just gonna wake him up and ask. Hitoshi released his hold and watched nervously as the light came back into Midoriya's eyes. Sure, he'd said that he wanted Hitoshi to brainwash him, but what if he got angry? It turned out that Hitoshi didn't have anything to be worried about, because the moment Midoriya was in control of himself again, he just shook his head and grinned brightly. That was so cool. Midoriya grabbed his notebook back from Hatsum and scribbled a few things down before handing the notebook to Hitoshi. Okay, so this time I want you to tell me to do the things on this list, and if I haven't woken up by the end of it, could you jostle me to wake me up? I want to compare that to Shinso releasing his control voluntarily. Sure thing, Izuku-san. Hatsum grinned and grabbed her phone to start recording the session. Ready? Do you think you'll wake up before the end? Hitoshi couldn't help asking. He had to ask a question to establish control anyway, so he may as well as one he was curious about. I don't know, Midoriya said. It'll depend on how your quirk deals with impossible orders. Okay. Hitoshi was pretty sure that they'd already figured that out, since Midoriya had just done nothing rather than answer his question earlier, but apparently, he was no longer the expert on his own quirk. He quickly took control of Midoriya and started going down the list. Most of the orders were easy things like stand up, sit down, stand on one foot, etc. The most interesting thing that happened was when Hitoshi ordered Midoriya to sit down on a stool. There wasn't a stool in the little room they were in, so to Hitoshi's surprise, Midoriya actually took the initiative to leave the room and go sit in the stool out by Powerloader's desk. Hitoshi almost died of embarrassment as he ran after Midoriya, frantically apologizing to the other support students, but he finally decided that their classmates must be used to their antics because the only response they gave to their classmate coming out practically brain-dead was a few curious glances and a few giggles to Powerloader's exasperation. Shinso, I'm assuming you're currently in control of Midoriya? Powerloader asked with a sigh. Hitoshi froze. This was it. This was how he got expelled from UA. He should have known better than to brainwash a UA student, even with their permission, and now he was going to get punished for his stupidity. He should have known this whole situation was too good to be true. He stared at the floor, clamping down on his anger and disappointment. Yes, sir. I'll release him from my quirk right away. There's no need for that. Powerloader said. I'm sure you're in the middle of an experiment, right? Hitsushi hesitantly nodded. Was Powerloader just going to accept that? He wasn't going to expel him for using his quirk on a fellow student. Apparently not, because Powerloader simply nodded as if this situation were completely normal or as normal as any situation could be when Midoriya and Hatsum were involved. Shinso, please tell Midoriya to get back into his room. Powerloader said. And make sure he doesn't run into anything dangerous on the way back. There are power tools in here. Hitoshi nodded frantically, grateful that he had somehow avoided getting expelled, and ordered Midoriya to go back to Hatsum, who was currently rolling on the floor of the little room dying of laughter. With his luck, he could just imagine Midoriya trying to walk all the way back home completely brainwashed if he told him to go to his room. After that minor blip, everything went smoothly. Everything that was, until Hitoshi read the last order on Midoriya's list. Hatsum. Hitoshi pointed to the page. Does he really want me to order him to do this? Don't call me Hatsum, extra credit Kuin, Mei-chan is fine. Hatsum leaned over and read the order. That one's actually a pretty important experiment, so yeah, he definitely wants you to do it. Oh okay. Hitoshi took a deep breath and looked at Midoriya, who was waiting in the middle of the room. Do a backflip. Midoriya squatted and jumped backwards, only to hit the ground as his attempt at a backflip completely failed. Ow! Midoriya groaned and rolled over, the impact more than enough to knock him from Hitoshi's control. Okay, so the person will still try to complete impossible commands, but won't be able to if the task is outside their ability level. Nice to know. I am so sorry. Hitoshi ran to help him up. I shouldn't have given you that order. Are you hurt? Do you need me to leave? I'm so sorry, I should stop asking questions. I'm probably making you really uncomfortable. Midoriya just laughed with a wince. No. I put that on there on purpose. It was the only thing I could think of that, while theoretically possible, wasn't a skill that I have. My first thought was that I would just wake up when given the order, or maybe my brain would subconsciously know how to complete the task. Wait, do you know how to do a backflip? Do I look like I know how to do a backflip? Hitoshi deadpanned. And why would that even matter? Because your quirk could be connecting your target's body to your brain instead of theirs. Midoriya explained as he took back his notebook. Make a note that we should ask Recovery Girl if she has access to some kind of brain scanner. We need to know whose brain lights up when tasks are being done, Shinso's or his target's. Will do, Izuku-en. Hatsumi said happily. I could probably build one myself if... Hitoshi couldn't help but feel like he was intruding as both of them dissolved into muttering and wrote down their observations in their respective notebooks. He was starting to wonder if he should just go back to class when one of Midoriya's more coherent mutterings caught his attention, and we know you can modify memories. So... No, I can't. Hitoshi interrupted before he could stop himself, and he leaned back slightly when both of his kidnappers stopped their note-taking to stare at him. Midoriya frowned. But in the footage you could. I don't know what you think you saw, but... Hitoshi shrugged helplessly. I mean, I've never actually tried it. I would have gotten in way too much trouble for something like that, but I can't even make someone answer a question, so I'm pretty sure I can't make someone forget something or anything like that. Midoriya tapped his cheek with his pencil a few times. What color is Shinso's hair? Hatsumi grinned. Purple. Midoriya nodded. Okay, now turn and face the wall. Shinso, put her under your quirk so we can try something. Wait, were they actually going to try to modify Hatsume's memories? It seemed like that shouldn't be something she should be okay with, but when it came to these two, Shinso didn't really know if any normal rules applied. If she wants me to, I can, but she'd have to answer one of my questions. Oh. Even from the back, Hatsume's excitement was obvious. Do I get to be the test subject this time? Are you actually crazy? Hitoshi asked incredulously. Hatsume simply laughed. Probably. Hitoshi activated his quirk and shook his head in disbelief. These two had to be insane. Okay, what now? Midoriya thought for a second. Tell her to remember your hair being green. Hitoshi still didn't think this was actually going to work, so he went ahead and gave the order, then released his control. Midoriya smiled at him, then turned to Hatsume. Okay, Machen, before you turn around, what color is Shinso's hair? Is this a trick question? Hatsume sounded confused. It's green, just like yours, Izuku-en. I thought you guys were going to mess with my memories or something. Hitoshi's jaw dropped and Midoriya's face split into a bright grin. Turn around. Hatsume turned quickly and did a double take as soon as she saw Hitoshi. Wow. That's so trippy. Hitoshi couldn't even think. He hadn't even known he could do that. Until he'd seen her reaction, he'd half thought they were just being nice or something, but he'd actually changed her memories. How did you know I could do that? Izuku smiled. I watched your entrance exam. That other examinee you got in a fight with? I know him. He wouldn't have let something like that slide unless he actually had forgotten about you like you ordered. All that left was confirming the theory. Hatsume grinned and leaned close to his face. I'm gonna have so much fun making your babies. Hitoshi walked into class 1C at the end of the hour shell-shocked and with a smear of soot on his cheek that he hadn't gotten around to wiping off after Hatsume's welcome explosion. The moment that present Mike saw him, the corners of his mouth started twitching and it was obvious that he was holding back giggles. So how was it? I think I just made a deal with the devil. Hitoshi said numbly. Actually, 2 devils. Is that worse? It feels like that's worse. This time, Mike-sensei didn't even bother to hold back his laughter. Yeah, the support course is like that. Go ahead and take a seat. Hitoshi ignored his classmates' whispers as he made his way to his seat and took out his things for the next lesson. Yes, Midoriya and Hatsume were overwhelming, but in less than an hour, they discovered things about his quirk that Hitoshi hadn't even realized after 10 years of having it. If anyone at UA could get him into the hero course, it was his kidnappers. So if those two really were demons, Hitoshi couldn't quite bring himself to regret signing away his soul. You rely on your quirk too much. Izuku almost felt bad saying it, especially since Shinso was taking time out of his day to talk to them during lunch. His quirk was amazing, so of course he relied on it, and it was part of him, so Izuku couldn't discount that, but, yep. Mei piped up, shoveling a spoonful of rice in her mouth. But don't feel bad. Most heroes do, but that's why you have us. Shinso looked at them skeptically. And how am I supposed to be a hero without my quirk? Izuku waved his hands frantically in front of him. Not without your quirk. We would never tell you to hold yourself back like that. It's just that, well, you see. It's the activation requirements. Mei interrupted. You're pretty good at making people respond to you, but eventually you're going to come across someone who has more self-control than you have sass. Izuku couldn't hold back a huff of shocked laughter. Yeah. What she said. The fact is that once people know about your quirk, you have a huge handicap. It would be like if a villain immediately took Snipe's gun at the beginning of a fight. He would still have his quirk, but he wouldn't be able to use it. The only difference here is that Snipe can use his quirk to protect his gun, you can't. Mei thought for a moment. He also carries an extra gun. Izuku-kun, let's give extra credit Kun a gun. Shinso looked at them in shock and a bit of fear, so Izuku figured he wasn't quite ready for that, despite the amazing potential the idea had. Maybe let's start with something smaller, like how we can prevent villains from finding out about his quirk. Nice thought. Shinso pointed at them with his chopsticks. But that's the thing about my quirk. If you fall for it once, you know how it works. Maybe. Izuku flipped through his notebook until he found a page that he'd used to scribble ideas. How long does your connection last? Shinso shrugged. No idea. I've never been allowed to control someone for more than a few minutes. That experiment with you the other day was as long as I've ever gone. That's not what Izuku had to take a second to gather his thoughts. I mean, that's good to know, but how long can you wait between getting a response and taking control? Shinso looked surprised, then thoughtful. I don't know. Always. Thought it was best to just take control as soon as I can, so I've never actually tried to wait or anything. Izuku grinned and flipped to a new page in his notebook. Perfect. So, how do you know the connection has been formed? Do you have to try to brainwash then, or can you just feel it? I can feel it. Shinso said quietly. It's like the person is inside my brain. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have told you that. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. Mei responded by slapping Shinso over the head. Stop that. Good experiments are uncomfy. You never learn anything interesting just by sitting on your butt. So embrace the awkward. Izuku laughed, then saw the shocked expression on Shinso's face and laughed even harder. I didn't know you could give inspirational speeches, Mei-chan. I'm a woman of many talents. Mei said cryptically. You'll never discover them all. And on that terrifying note, Shinso drawled, do you want to start? Of course. Izuku responded with a grin. Do you have the connection now? Shinso nodded with a concentrated look on his face, but didn't respond. Izuku nodded. It must take a fair amount of focus to keep the connection without completing the brainwash. Mei, start the timer. Already on it, Izuku-kun. Mei pressed a few buttons on her phone and the experiment officially began. So, Izuku-kun, how are the hero students doing? Any opportunities for me to make super awesome babies? They're doing well. Izuku smiled and grabbed one of the many notebooks he'd created for the project. Each student had their own notebook dedicated to their quirks and ideas, and while some were still completely empty, others were already halfway full. The notebook Izuku happened to grab was for one of the Class 1B students with a really cool copy quirk. Take this guy, Monoma, for example. He can copy any quirk for 5 minutes, but I think there might be a way for him to create basically a stockpile of quirks. If he has to touch a person's whole body, then that won't work, but if it works with any DNA, then he can incorporate different quirks into his costume and always have them on hand when he needs them. Mei grinned. I like the way you think, Izuku-kun. Suddenly, Izuku's brain went foggy as the increasingly familiar feeling of Shinso's quirk washed over him. It only lasted a few seconds before Shinso released his control. I am so sorry. Shinso was a little out of breath and looked pale and slightly sweaty. I held on for as long as I could, but why is that so difficult? Because your quirk wants action. Izuku said. Instinctively, people want to either do something or not. No one likes being caught in an in-between place. But this is great. You don't have to take control immediately, which gives you a few minutes to disguise your real activation requirements. How long did he last? 2 minutes, 8 seconds. Mei declared. I'd prefer if it were a little longer, but we can train for that. Izuku agreed. Ideally, we could get him up to 5 minutes between response and control before the sports festival, but we'll of course have to see how things work and… Wait, back up. Shinso interrupted. What do you mean my real activation requirements? And shouldn't I be focused on keeping control of people longer or controlling more people or giving more advanced orders or something? What's the point of training to wait before taking control, which isn't easy by the way, when as a hero, I should be trying to resolve situations as quickly as possible? Izuku looked at Mei, who shrugged. He thought they'd explained everything pretty well. Shinso sighed. How about you two start again at the beginning, but this time pretend that you're talking to someone who doesn't have a single clue you're trying to say because I don't. Oh, Izuku glanced at Mei again before taking a deep breath to try to organize his thoughts. Okay. So, the main problem with your quirk is that it's more effective if your opponent doesn't know what it is, right? That's the basic idea, yeah. Shinso rolled his eyes. But what does that have to do with the time between their response and my control? Because from where I'm sitting, it seemed like a non sequitur. It's a red herring. Mei grinned. Shinso didn't look any less confused and raised an eyebrow at Izuku after apparently giving up getting anything close to a normal answer from Mei. It's about distracting whoever you're fighting with and burying the truth inside a bunch of useless information. Izuku explained. For example, sometimes in books, something important will be thrown out, but the readers won't realize it, because the man with the scar who turns out to be the villain was mentioned right alongside a woman with a large hat who was completely unimportant. If you take control immediately after you get an answer, Mei flicked Shinso on the forehead, then it's like putting a big neon sign above your head explaining how your quirk works. Oh thanks, Shinso said dryly. But, Izuku said quickly, if you wait a few minutes between establishing the connection and giving the order, and use those minutes to do things like make direct eye contact or establish physical contact, or I don't know, jump up and down 3 times while singing nursery rhymes, then no one will know exactly which of those things established the connection. Mei finished. I don't sing. Shinso deadpanned, but Izuku could see the faintest trace of a smile in his eyes, and it looked like he finally understood what they were going for. Okay, so when do I start? Well, technically you started today. Izuku said cheekily. But we'll have a schedule for you by tomorrow if you come by after classes. Do you have anyone at home that you can practice your quirk with? Shinso's expression immediately closed off. Interesting. No. That's all right. Izuku said, forcing a layer of cheeriness past his curiosity and, surprisingly, a little bit of anger on Shinso's behalf. Then you'll just have to practice with us. I don't want you to do any more today, since this exercise is still so new and it's the first time that your brain has had to do it, so we should let it rest. But starting tomorrow, you should start practicing that waiting exercise we just did 2 or 3 times a day. For the sports festival, you also need to be able to complete distracting tasks before you officially activate your quirk, so we should focus on getting you to the point where you don't even have to think about it and have full autonomy on when you activate your connection. Shinso looked a little pale, but Izuku noticed that he also looked determined, just like himself when he used to say he'd be a hero despite his quirklessness. It didn't work out for him, but if he could still help people like Shinso who deserve to be heroes, then that was more than enough. Shinso would overcome every obstacle put in his path and save so many people, and Izuku would have a hand in that. It was almost even better than his own old dream. Perfect. Mei broke the tension by grabbing Shinso by the arm and dragging him back out into the main lab. Now that Izuku's had a chance to do his thing, it's my turn. I'm so excited. I have so many awesome babies for you to try. Bee babies? Shinso looked nervous and a little shocked. But why? Izuku felt a little bad, but he couldn't help laughing when he realized that he had never actually explained some of Mei's more Exciting eccentricities to Shinso. Oh well, better late than never, he supposed. She means her inventions. Izuku managed to gasp between his chuckles. Mei-chan calls her inventions her babies because she cares about them so much. I made them, Izuku-en. Mei cried indignantly. If you poured your heart and soul into something, you'd call them your babies too. I do pour my heart and soul into something. Izuku grinned cheekily. I call them my notebooks. So, we're just going to be looking at inventions, Shinso confirmed, not experimenting with human children. The only human children we'll be experimenting on are ourselves. Mei said gleefully, grabbing a large cardboard box from her workstation. Extra credit, Koen. Grab that box under the table. Shinso shrugged and went to pick up the box, only to stumble when the weight was more than he expected. What's in this thing, rocks? Oh hush, it's not that heavy. Mei dismissed. Izuku-en, grab the other one. Izuku shrugged and ignored the way that Shinso looked at him knowingly as he tried to pick up the box, only to grunt and fall backwards onto his butt. Mei-chan, seriously? How strong are you? It's not my fault you boys are weak. Mei shrugged. Come on, we need to steal one of the soundproof test rooms. Izuku stared after her in shock as she walked away and for the first time noticed how much muscle tone she actually had. She'd handled that box like it was nothing, even though both he and Shinso had struggled. He supposed it made sense with how much heavy material she had to work with while inventing, but it was still really impressive. Are you just gonna keep staring at her but all day? Kahaku asked dryly, looking up from her own invention, or are you actually gonna help her? Izuku sputtered and turned bright red. I didn't. Deciding that it was best to just cut his losses, Izuku grabbed the box and hefted it as best he could before leaving his snickering classmates behind and following Mei and Shinso. Mei was already taking things out of her box while Shinso was catching his breath and leaning against the wall. Izuku set his box down heavily next to the other two on the table and started shaking out his arms. Shinso looked at Mei. Is she actually human? Or is she just some robot that killed its creator and started updating itself while pretending to be human? Oh. Mei grinned. No, Mei-chan. Izuku said patiently. You can't make yourself into a cyborg. Mei deflated, then brightened and was about to say something, but Izuku interrupted her before she could say what he knew she was going to say. You can't make Shinso into a cyborg either. Mei pouted. It'd be a great way to get around that stupid one support item only rule that the Gen Ed students have. And how is he gonna beat the hero course if he can't even lift a box? Hey! Shinso straight up. I lifted it. I did better than Midoriya anyway. Izuku-en is an analyst. Mei-chan said. He can afford to be a weakling. Thanks. Izuku deadpanned, then frowned thoughtfully. But in all seriousness, it would probably be a good idea for you to take up some sort of physical training, Shinso. Your quirk will probably keep you out of most fights, but there's always times that a hero has to rely on their body more than their quirk. Take Eraserhead, for example. He's such a great hero because of his martial arts training, not just his ability to cancel quirks. You like Eraserhead? Shinso asked. I've never met someone else who liked him. Most people I talked to before you had just thought I was making him up. Oh, he's one of my favorites. Izuku grinned. Did you hear he's one of the teachers here? Have you seen him yet? No, I've been looking everywhere, hoping to catch a glimpse of him in the halls, but I haven't had any luck. Shinso frowned. I guess he's just that good at stealth, huh? I mean, you kinda have to be to avoid the media as a professional hero. Izuku said. What do you think? Experiments now, fanboying later. Mei said, popping between them with a large metal mask in one hand and 3 pairs of protective earmuffs in the other. Put these on. Izuku put one of the earmuffs around his neck as Mei helped Shinso into the mask. If you want, we could probably use one of the school's gyms to work out and try to gain some strength before the sports festival. Shinso raised an eyebrow at him. We? Izuku shrugged and stretched out his arms. I sit in front of a screen all day, I've been getting sore. Everywhere online says that adding some physical activity into my schedule will help with that. Plus, I can't just call Mei-chan every time I need to move something heavy. I'm sure she'd be more than happy to open all the jars for you. Shinso smirked. Nope, too busy. Mei said. Now extra credit Kun, stand on the other side of that plexiglass and yell. Shinso's eyes widened. Yell? Mei grinned and nodded. We need a baseline for volume. Okay. Shinso walked across the room and waited until both Mei and Izuku had put on their earmuffs before taking a deep breath and yelling as loudly as he could, shaking the room. Mei took a few notes, looking at an instrument in her hands that Izuku had no idea what it was or how to read it, but assumed it told her something about the decibels or volume or whatever. She pulled one side of her earmuffs away from her, prompting Izuku and Shinso to do the same. Okay, extra credit Kun, now try to brainwash Izuku-kun. Shinso nodded and turned to Izuku. What's your favorite food? Katsudon. Izuku waited for the familiar feeling of Shinso's quirk to wash over him, but instead, after a few seconds, Shinso just shook his head. I can't make the connection. Is this mask electronically transmitting my voice? Yes. Mei said. Is that a problem? It must be a problem with quirk transmission. Izuku said. Whatever establishes the connection is carried on the voice itself, so having a speaker probably blocks that part. Is that right? When Shinso nodded, Mei took another prototype from one of the boxes and handed it to Shinso. Okay. Mask Baby 2.0. This should magnify your voice without need for a speaker. And you just have this? Shinso asked. We knew that might be a risk. Izuku responded. And Mei enjoyed the challenge. It's not as advanced as my other babies. Mei said. But for now, it should amplify your voice and I can modify it later to act as a voice changer. Now go yell. Shinso walked back behind the plexiglass and screamed, making Izuku wince, even with his earmuffs. Mei wrote something down, then gestured for him to do it again. When he finished, Izuku felt like his ears were still ringing. Or wait, was that something else? He held up a hand to signal Shinso to stop and took off his earmuffs. Do you guys hear anything? I'm wearing earmuffs in a soundproof room. Shinso deadpanned. The only thing I can hear is my own thoughts. Izuku frowned but listened closer, and, sure enough, he could still hear something coming from outside. Do you hear that, Mei-chan? Mei nodded. It sounds like alarms. The three of them hurried to the door and opened it, only to be blasted with the sound of blaring alarms and flashing lights. The classroom was already empty, and their classmates were nowhere to be found. They must have assumed we heard the alarm, Mei said. Or they tried knocking on the door and we didn't hear them. Did we cause the alarm to go off? Izuku was panicking. I didn't think we were being that loud, but if something went wrong and sound can cause damage, look at present mic. Are we going to get in trouble? What if they never let us near a test room again? What if they expel? They're not going to be mad at us for setting off an alarm, Izuku-kun. Mei groaned. And I don't think this was us anyway. It would have taken at least twice as much noise to trigger the auditory attack defense system. Should we leave? Shinso asked. I don't want to be here if that's a fire alarm. But my babies, Mei said. I can't just leave them. Mei, whatever Izuku was about to say was cut off by the alarms going silent. Or not. The PA system crackled to life and Nedzu's cheery voice filtered through the speakers. Hello students, the threat has been handled. Please calmly return to class. All right then, Mei said, pushing both boys back in the soundproof room. Back to testing. Izuku thought it was odd that there was an alarm in the middle of the day, and what had Nedzu meant by threat? He meant to look into it later, he really did, but then Mei started another round of experiments, and he completely forgot. Izuku sharpened his pencils and separated the notebooks he'd dedicated to Class 1A. He didn't really think he'd learn anything new about their quirks today, since they were just doing a special rescue lesson, but it would be interesting to see how they applied their quirks in a non-combat-oriented situation. He was particularly excited to see how Katsuki reacted to being confronted with a problem that he couldn't punch. Izuku glanced at the clock. The class would be arriving in just a few minutes, assuming that no one had any issues getting into their costumes or anything, so he went ahead and opened up the camera feeds to get a visual of 13 already waiting inside. Their quirk was so amazing. Izuku made a mental note that he needed to get their autograph sometime, maybe after the sports festival? Since the students hadn't arrived yet, Izuku figured he might as well use the time to familiarize himself with the facility. It was so cool. There were all sorts of different terrain that simulated different disasters that the students would have to deal with as pro-heroes, and from his place inside the system, Izuku could easily see all the different controls for each of the zones. At any point, 13, Nedzu or whoever was teaching could easily turn off any of the disaster zones if anything went wrong, or even turn them up or control them almost like a video game to offer their students more of a challenge. They'd all been set to the lowest automatic disaster setting for the first years, obviously, but Izuku knew he'd be asking Nedzu if he could observe one of the third year's rescue exercises so he could see the building's full potential. It was so cool. Movement on one of his screens caught his eye as the bus finally arrived and the students started to file off following a grumpy eraserhead like a line of little ducklings. Izuku snickered to himself. Maybe there was a way he could make sure Katsuki heard that? It would be sure to PSS him off. The last student left the bus. Izuku checked the schedule. Wasn't All Might supposed to be there today? As 13 lectured the students on quirk safety, Izuku hummed thoughtfully and pulled out his phone to check the news. May had called him to ramble about a new idea, right as he was about to get on the train, so he hadn't had a chance to read the headlines that morning like he unusually did. Sure enough, All Might was all over the news, which meant that he must already be either near or over his limit for the day. Izuku couldn't really fault him, since those people obviously needed to be saved and being their hero was All Might's job, but he had been really looking forward to seeing his favorite hero perform rescue exercises just like his debut. Even if he wouldn't actually be in the same room, it still would have been really cool to watch something like that live. With the mystery of All Might's absence solved, Izuku turned his attention back to the screens in front of him, where 13 was finishing up their lecture as a blackish-purple something started to appear behind them. Izuku frowned and zoomed in to get a closer look. He hadn't seen any obstacles like that in the system, but it was possible he'd missed something. Suddenly, every single camera cut out at the exact same time. Izuku immediately attacked his keyboard, desperately trying to convince himself that there was no reason to panic. It must just be a weird electrical glitch or something. There was no way that that purple thing was a villain trying to attack the students, right? But even if it was an electrical glitch, there was a failsafe on another electrical system that would trigger the alarms if a certain number of cameras stopped working, and that alarm wasn't going off. No alarms were. After a minute of trying to get the cameras back up, Izuku hesitantly stood up and left his desk. It was probably nothing. UA's security was the best of the best. But it still wouldn't hurt to have Power Loader call 13 and make sure everything was alright, right? It was completely unnecessary and would probably annoy them, because there was definitely not a villain attack happening right now, but just in case there was. Izuku slowly approached Power Loader's desk, only to find him talking to Hanzo. He didn't want to interrupt him while he was helping another student, but there might be an attack happening right now. Power Loader? Midoriya? Power Loader nodded to him. I'll be with you in just a minute. Izuku took a deep breath. The longer he thought about it, the more the whole situation just seemed wrong. He familiarized himself with the USJ, and there was nothing that was like that purple thing. Now was definitely not the time to let his social anxiety get the better of him. Actually, sir, Izuku tried to inject as much urgency as he could, hoping Power Loader would get the message without making the class panic. I need you to check something out. Now. Power Loader looked at him strangely. Hanzo, just keep working. I'm going to see what Midoriya needs and I'll be back in a minute. When Hanzo shrugged good-naturedly, Izuku walked back to his workroom as quickly as he could without running, grateful beyond belief that Power Loader was so different from his middle school teachers and trusted him without asking too many questions. It was nice and he would probably be crying if he wasn't so worried. A part of him half expected the cameras to be working again when he got back to his computer, making his entire anxiety attack an embarrassing overreaction, but of course, all of his screens were still blank. Izuku waited for Power Loader to follow him in before closing the door. All right, Midoriya, what is this about? Power Loader asked. It's not like you to interrupt like that. Yes, obviously. but not. I lost contact with the USJ. Izuku blurted out. Power loader froze. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I was watching 1A over the cameras and everything was fine, but then there was this purple thing and the cameras just stopped working. I couldn't find anything like that in the system and there should be alarms going off but there's not and Izuku forced himself to stop rambling and took a deep breath. I think it might be a villain attack. Power loader took a sharp intake of breath. It's all Might, 13 and Eraserhead there today, right? Izuku shook his head. 13 and Eraserhead are there, but All Might's already at his limit. Is there any way you could call them? Just to make sure everything's alright. Power loader was already pulling out his phone. Why am I not surprised that you know about that? I'm sure everything's fine. This'll just take a minute. Izuku held his breath as the phone rang. After a long minute, Power loader took the phone from his ear and dialed another number. Eraser sometimes doesn't answer the phone, you know how he is, he thinks it's a waste of time, but 13 should have their phone on them. Power loader's face grew more and more worried as the phone continued ringing with no answer until he finally put it away. I need to report this to Nedzu. Izuku gulped and sat down at his desk, pulling his keyboard toward him. So it was an attack then. I'll try to reconnect with the cameras and keep you updated. Power loader nodded stiffly and left, only to return a second later with a small box that he set down on the desk in front of him. Have you ever used a comm link before? Izuku shook his head and Power loader took one out and handed it to him. Okay, channel control is right on the side there. Just tune it to channel 3 and you'll be able to talk to any of the teachers once they turn their comms on. It's an open line, so we should be able to hear everything. Do you understand? Izuku set up the comm like Power loader had told him and put it in his ear, then nodded. Power loader returned the gesture before throwing open the door to the lab. Hanzo, as class rep, I'm leaving you in charge. Make sure nobody blows anything up. There were some groans and exclamations, but Power loader didn't pay attention to any of them as he closed the door to the workroom and left the lab as quickly as he could. Izuku distantly noted that he didn't run either. So they didn't want to cause a panic at the main school then. His fingers flew over the keyboard as he started troubleshooting the cameras. He had only been at it a few minutes when the PA system crackled to life, but Izuku barely noticed the announcement. All teachers please report to the front office immediately. Again, all teachers to the front office. There was a small string of code that seemed to be repeating and it looked almost like it could be a technology quirk of some kind that was blocking the signals. Izuku felt torn. On the one hand, having a quirk involved meant that it was almost definitely villains, but on the other, Izuku knew quirks. All he had to do was find the quirk's weakness and exploit it. Midoriya? Power loader's voice echoed in his earpiece. Are you still there? Yes, sir. Izuku didn't stop working, even as the other teachers started talking. Wait, the little listeners on the comm link? That was Present Mic's voice. He knew it well enough from listening to his radio show for years. Young Midoriya's here? All Might asked. It seemed like Nedzu was ignoring all of them, since he addressed Izuku next. Have you had any luck in re-establishing contact with the USJ facility? Not yet, sir. Izuku said distractedly. But it is a technology quirk and, yes. Do you have a visual? Power loader asked. What? Izuku's brain took a moment to catch up. Oh no, not yet, but I figured out how the blocking quirk works. It seems to only be blocking a specific type of signal. I mean, that's obviously what our cameras are using, but I might be able to jury-rig things from my side and use another type of signal to connect. All right. Nedzu said. Do that and tell us immediately when you get through. Izuku felt a small surge of pride. Nedzu had said when, not if. He believed in him. He shook his head. No time to think about that right now. Right now he needed to make sure that the teachers weren't going into this fight blind. It took him a few minutes to hack his way through, but he'd already tried hacking UA twice now, so he knew how all the systems worked, and with the extra permissions that Nedzu had given him, Izuku had just barely enough experience and authority to do what he had in mind. He hit one final key, the cameras flared to life again, and Izuku didn't like what he saw. Those were definitely villains. Nedzu, I have a visual. What's the situation? Students had been scattered throughout the facility. Izuku reported. Eraserhead is fighting, but he's outnumbered. There are dozens of them. Mostly low level though, it looks like. 13 is by the entrance protecting some of the students. They seem to be in a stalemate with one of the villains, probably the one responsible for the purple thing I saw before the cameras cut out, considering they seem to be made of some kind of purple mist. Izuku didn't know how he was so composed considering that there was a villain attack happening and oh god, people might die, but he supposed he was just too busy to panic. Or maybe he was channeling his panic into focus. That made sense. Suddenly, the stalemate between 13 and the villain broke. 13 is down. Izuku yelled. I repeat, 13 is down. He heard several of the teachers swear over the line, but he was too busy starting at the screen to respond. 13. Were they even going to survive that attack? Is this what villains really did? Izuku felt so powerless. He wasn't even there. He couldn't even do anything to help them. There's a physical limit to how fast we can go, Hound Dog growled. All Might sounded worried. Maybe I should. No, Izuku started scanning the cameras again. You're already at your limit. If you use what little you have left to get there, you're not going to have enough energy left to fight the villains. The students are holding their own for now. The one that hurt 13 has a warp quirk and turned their quirk against them. It was a lucky shot, and it won't work against most of the students. But Midoriya is correct. Nedza said, if there is a warp quirk, there might be other powerful quirks as well. The students need you to be as close to full strength as possible. Eraserhead is still there and the villains don't know that we know of the attack, so it's better to go as fast as humanly possible for now. Midoriya, let us know if anything changes. Will do. Izuku felt so useless. There had to be something he could do. It might help the heroes if he could figure out why the heroes were there. And for that he needed audio. Izuku used the same hack he'd used on the cameras and started eavesdropping on the various villains' conversations, switching the microphones rapidly as he tried to overhear anything useful. That didn't tell me the plan, kid, I swear. One of the villains was caught in Todoroki's ice quirk. All they told me was that they're gonna kill All Might. That's all I know. Izuku switched mics again as Todoroki started unthawing the villain. Not the most hero-like, but then again, neither was hacking so he couldn't talk. They're here to kill All Might. I don't know why or how yet. There was a villain near where Eraserhead was fighting, but he almost seemed to be supervising instead of fighting himself. Izuku switched to one of the mics near him as the villain started scratching at his neck. A stress response? When's the final boss gonna get here? The villain's voice was raspy as he muttered to himself. We're running out of NPCs. So, immature? It was hard to tell how old the villain was, but considering that he called his own men NPCs, he was almost definitely the leader. Probably antisocial, considering the video game references. Final boss must be All Might. Did he know that the heroes were on their way? No, then he would have said something about final bosses or even mini-bosses, but he didn't, so he was probably thinking that All Might was just late. Still, the video game references gave him an idea. Now that he'd done it twice, it didn't take Izuku all that long to hack into each of the different zones. Within minutes, he had the weapons of artificial flooding, earthquake simulators, flamethrowers, and so much more at his fingertips. With Eraserhead slowing down, he had to do everything in his power to make sure that the students were safe. All right, villain, you want to treat this like a game? Izuku stretched his hands out in front of him, popping his knuckles. Then let's play.